Call your witness.
The people called Jeffrey McConney.
Witness entering, whereupon the witness takes the witness stand.
Hi, Your Honor.
State your full name, spelling your last name.
Jeffrey McConney, McConney.
Your county of residence.
Manhattan County, New York County.
You may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. McConney.
Good morning, sir.
Please describe your educational background, starting with college.
Yes, I graduated Baruch College in 1978. While I was working in Baruch, I worked part-time for a real estate firm, Joseph Ratner Company. When I graduated, I went to work for an accounting firm, Spar, Locker, Burke, and Namer. From there, I was hired by the Trump Organization.
About what year were you hired by the Trump Organization?
1987.
Are you still working for the Trump Organization?
I'm retired happily.
When did you retire?
February of 2023.
What was your position when you first joined the Trump Organization in 1987?
I was assistant controller.
What was your position when you retired from the Trump Organization last year?
Senior vice president, controller.
How many years in total did you work for the Trump Organization?
It was a little short of 37.
When you left the Trump Organization last year, did you sign a separation agreement?
Yes.
And did that include separation payments?
Yes.
How are those payments paid?
They were quarterly payments made at the end of every calendar quarter.
Are those payments now complete?
Yes.
While you were working at the Trump Organization, did you also do any outside work?
You mean outside the personal tax returns on my own? Yes.
Okay, please describe that work.
I prepared personal tax returns, 1 or 2 tax returns, since the time I worked at Spar Locker until now.
How many years did you do work as a tax preparer?
Almost 50.
Are you still preparing tax returns?
I'm trying to get my clients to work. To answer your question, yes.
Are you here today in response to a subpoena from the district attorney's office?
Yes.
Are you represented by counsel here today?
Yes.
Who is paying for your attorney?
The Trump Organization.
You mentioned the Trump Organization a few times this morning. What is the Trump Organization?
To me, there's 2 definitions. As an accountant, there are 2 legal entities, the Trump Organization, Inc. and the Trump Organization, LLC. So that's legal entities. Most people refer to the Trump Organization as President Trump's global holding and ownership of various assets, license deals, intellectual property, or whatever.
So, does the name the Trump Organization refer collectively to all of the different entities that Mr. Trump owns?
That's usually the way I refer to it.
During the time you worked for the Trump Organization, who ran the company?
President Trump.
And before 2017, what was Mr. Trump's role in the Trump Organization?
I'm not sure. He ran the organization. He was the brains behind it. I don't know how to answer that question.
When you worked there, did you consider Mr. Trump your boss?
Yes.
Have you had any conversations with Mr. Trump since you retired from the Trump Organization last February?
No.
You mentioned that the Trump Organization refers collectively to a number of different entities. How many entities are part of the Trump Organization?
Before I retired, I don't know what they've done since. I believe it was over 500.
And can you describe the relationship between those entities and the Trump Organization?
That gets a little... With the Trump Organization, you have to drop the org because that's an entity. All those entities are owned, ultimately now, by the Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust.
Okay, I'll ask you about the trust in a minute. For the entities that make up the Trump Organization, what kind of businesses are they in?
Golf courses, real estate, licensing deals. That's the bulk of the business types. Management company.
Before you retired, did you have a work email address?
Yes.
What was the domain name for your email address?
Trumporg.com.
Where was the Trump Organization headquartered before?
725 Fifth Avenue in New York City.
Where was your office located?
725 Fifth Avenue, New York City.
Is that also called Trump Tower?
Yes.
You testified a minute ago that legally the Trump Organization itself doesn't hold any assets. Is that right?
Yes.
Is there an entity that holds the Trump Organization's assets?
Well, each entity, the way we set everything up is each asset was owned by a separate entity and sometimes multiple entities. So Trump Tower would have been owned by an entity, Trump Commercial LLC, and may have had a few members in that entity. And does that answer your question?
Yes. Do all those entities roll up ultimately to, I think you mentioned the trust a minute ago? Do they all roll up to the trust?
Yes, that's the ultimate owner.
Who's the official owner officially of the trust?
President Trump.
Please display for the witness, the court, and counsel a document marked for identification as Peoples 86. Let me know if you see that on your screen, Mr. McConney.
Yes.
Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
It's a summarized structure chart of the Donald Trump Revocable Trust and the ownership layers below it.
Does the first page of that chart refer to a number of attached schedules?
Yes.
Let's display page 2, please. Is this one of the schedule's records on the first page?
Yeah, that's the whole schedule, or part of yes.
What's the date on the top right of that page?
As of January 20th, 2017.
Did you have an opportunity to review all of the pages in People's 86 before testifying today?
Yes.
And what do the remaining pages include?
The pages lay out the ownership structure of which entity is owned by or owned another entity.
Who prepared this document?
I don't know who. I'm under the impression or the understanding that the Trump Organization legal department prepared this document.
And when did you first see it?
I believe sometime in early 2017.
Was this document made in the regular and ordinary course of business?
Yes, it was.
Was it the regular practice of the Trump Organization to prepare documents depicting the ownership structure of the entities that made up the Trump Organization?
Yes, sir.
Was this document prepared at or about the time the Trump Organization entities were moved into the trust?
Yes, sir.
Was the person or persons who prepared this document under a business duty to do so accurately?
Yes, sir.
I offer People's 86 into evidence.
No objection.
People's 86 is accepted into evidence.
Please publish People's 86 in full. Let's go back to page 1. Mr. McConney, can you read what it says across the top of this chart, please?
The very top line?
Yes, please.
Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust.
What does it say below that?
Dated April 7th, 2014.
Does this chart depict the trust ownership structure that you just described?
Yes, some of it, yes.
Does it show various holding companies that themselves hold various entities, which all make up the Trump Organization?
Yes.
And do they all roll up to the trust?
Yes.
You may have mentioned this a minute ago. The chart refers to a number of attached schedules. Are you familiar with those schedules?
Yes.
Please turn to page 2. What do those schedules show?
Usually a description of what the entities below it or the relationship or ownership of what those entities have to another entity. In this case, DJT Management Holdings. LLC owns 100% of all the entities below it.
Do the remaining schedules in this show the 500 or so entities were owned by the trust as of January of 2017?
Yes.
When was the trust itself created?
I'm not too sure. I think the first page said 2014, but I'm really not sure.
Let's go back to the first page. Let me direct your attention to the top. Is that the date you're referring to?
Yes.
Do you have an understanding based on that when the trust was created?
We didn't use it in 2014 or 15, so I don't know if that's when it was set up. I'm not a lawyer, so that's my guess that it was set up in April of 2014.
In 2017, who were the trustees of the trust?
Donald J. Trump Jr. and Alan Weisselberg.
You testified a minute ago that your position when you retired from the Trump Organization was Senior Vice President and Controller, is that right?
Yes, sir.
When did you first become the Controller?
16, 17, 18 years ago. I don't remember the exact year.
Right before you were promoted to the position of Controller, who held that position at the Trump Organization?
Alan Weisselberg.
And how did the position of the Controller become open?
Alan was promoted to CFO or Chief Financial Officer, and then I was promoted to Controller.
As Controller, who did you report to directly?
Alan Weisselberg.
How long was Mr. Weisselberg your supervisor?
From the day I was hired to the day he left.
More than 3 decades?
Yes.
How often did you interact with Mr. Weisselberg during the time he was the Chief Financial Officer?
Other than having lunch every day, whenever I needed to. His office was next to mine. If he needed to find me or if I needed to find him, I'd find him.
In the time period from 2015 to 2016, who did Mr. Weisselberg report to?
Prior to January 20th of 2017?
Yes.
Mr. President Trump.
Did Mr. Weisselberg meet regularly with Mr. Trump on organizational matters?
I'm sure he met with him. I don't know if it was regularly or not.
What were your responsibilities as Controller?
I oversaw the 401k plan. I processed payroll. I interfaced with the accounting firm to make sure they had the necessary information to prepare financial statements, tax returns. I worked on loan documents, tried to make sure we adhered to the loan covenants, oversaw the accounting department at 725 Fifth Avenue. There may be a few more things.
Did part of your responsibilities in overseeing the accounting department include overseeing the general ledger?
Yes.
Did those responsibilities also include overseeing accounts payable?
Yes.
Did those responsibilities also include overseeing expense payments?
Not really overseeing them. I mean, they really didn't go through me for processing. I know of them, but they were mainly handled by accounts payable directly.
And was accounts payable part of the accounting department?
Yes.
And you oversaw the accounting department as a whole?
Yes.
In your role as Controller, and in the period from 2015 to 2017, were there employees that reported to you?
Yes.
How many?
Around 10.
Was one of those employees Deb Tarasoff?
Yes.
What was Ms. Tarasov's role in the accounting department?
She was the accounts payable supervisor.
Can you tell the jury what accounts payable means?
Accounts payable means when you or an entity owes somebody money.
Was Rebecca Minocchio part of the staff of the accounting department?
Yes.
Is she one of the people who reported to you?
Yes.
What was Ms. Minocchio's role?
Around that time, she was an administrative assistant. She moved up to the accounts receivable department somewhere in the last few years. I don't remember exactly when.
What does accounts receivable mean?
Accounts receivable is the other side, when somebody owes you money.
You mentioned that one of your functions as controller was overseeing the general ledger, is that right?
Yes.
What is a general ledger?
General, there are two books of original entry in accounting. You have cash receipts, the money you receive, and cash disbursements, the money you spend. The general ledger puts that information together. The information is posted by the general ledger accounts receipts, so you can see different types of expenses, payroll, gas, electric, how much you're spending at a different point in time.
Does the general ledger keep track of all the interactions the general ledger makes?
Yes.
You mentioned the term cash receipts. Does that include money coming in?
Yes.
You also mentioned cash disbursements. Does that mean money going out?
Yes.
Through your role as controller, were you familiar with the way the Trump organization kept and maintained its general ledgers?
Yes.
Does each entity that makes up the Trump organization have its own general ledger?
If an entity has a bank account, it has a general ledger. There are a number of entities that we have that did not have a bank account, so they did not have a general ledger. So, for argument's sake, if we would set up an LLC, the LLC would pay for the transactions. So it would have a bank account. The member corp would be a 1% member or 1/10% member. We didn't feel it was a reason for it to have a bank account. Any expenses for that entity could be paid someplace else, so there was no reason to have a bank account or a ledger.
For any entity that did have a bank account, it had a general ledger?
Yes.
Did the Trump Organization headquarters in Manhattan oversee the accounting for all the entities that make up the Trump Organization?
Not all of them, no.
Which ones were excluded?
Basically, the golf courses and the hotels, they had their own accounting staff. We maintained and took care of all the other entities.
Okay, so everything except hotels and golf courses.
Yes.
As controller, was it part of your job responsibility to make sure the general ledger was accurate?
Yes.
Is the general ledger computerized?
Yes.
Did the Trump Organization use a particular software program to maintain its general ledgers?
Yes.
What was the name of that software program?
We called it MDS. I think it was short for Multi-Data Services or Multi-Data Systems. I'm not too sure the correct name.
But you called it MDS?
MDS?
Please explain briefly what MDS is.
MDS is a computer program where you can record your cash receipts, money that you received, your bills that you pay, your accounts payable cash disbursements. You can run various reports for cash receipts, cash disbursements, general ledgers, trial balances, information that the accountants would need to prepare tax returns or financial statements.
How long did the Trump Organization use MDS as its computerized general ledger?
That was one of my first jobs back in the 80s to set up the accounting system. So we used it from the day it was up and running, sometime in 1990 or 91. It was still in use when I left.
Who enters information into the general ledger system?
Mainly the accounting department.
Does that include the people we mentioned, Ms. Tarasov, for example?
Right. Deb would enter bills to be paid.
Can you use MDS to generate reports?
Yes.
What kind of reports can MDS generate?
There are standard reports you can run for accounts payable if you wanted to see how many bills you had that weren't paid. If you wanted to see what vendors. That doesn't make sense. On cash receipts, we can run multi-cash reports, tenant ledgers, rent rolls. There's a variety of reports that you can run. You can also customize your own reports.
Could you customize a report to show only certain kinds of expenses from one account?
Yes.
Did you run reports from the general ledger for tax purposes?
Yes.
Describe that, please.
The accounting firm would, at the beginning of the year, would start giving us a list of entities that they wanted trial balance or general ledgers for. We would run the entire general ledger and trial balance and send it to them. That's things we did for all the 17? Yeah.
Does the accounting department maintain the general ledger for the Donald J. Trump revocable trust account?
Yes.
Is that general ledger managed using MDS?
Yes.
Does the accounting staff or accounting department also maintain bank accounts for the trust?
Yes.
What does that entail?
When a bank statement comes in at the end of the month, we reconcile the bank statement. If a deposit comes in cash received, we received money from an entity or person that owes the trust money, we record it in cash receipts. If a bill is paid, some charged bill, Real estate tax bill, that's paid out of the trust. That's also recorded in the electronic system.
How long has the accounting department had bank accounts for the trust?
That program was written sometime, I believe, in the 90s or whenever that program was written, from that point forward. So we maintained within multi-data from that point forward, we always maintained bank accounts once we opened them.
Does the accounting department maintain general ledgers for Mr. Trump's personal accounts?
Yes.
Does that account have a particular account code?
It has a company code, which is an abbreviation used in order to find information or process information. The code is DJT.
When you say company code of DJT, can you describe what that means?
You have your 5 or 6 digit code in the system you're allowed to use. So if you want to prohibit a cash disbursement or a list of payments, you have to pick a company. Instead of writing Donald J. Trump, you would just write in PGT and company. It would access information. It separated each entity by itself. It was just a short abbreviation for the entity name.
So each entity had its own code, and the code for Mr. Trump's account was DJT. Is that right?
For his personal account, yes.
Does the accounting staff maintain the general ledger for the DJT account using MDS?
Yes.
Did the accounting staff also maintain the books and records for Mr. Trump's bank accounts?
Yes.
Does that include any checking accounts?
Yes.
In the 2017 time period, did Mr. Trump use a Capital One checking account as his main operating account?
I believe so, yes.
Was the accounting department also responsible for making sure that all of the entities that are part of the Trump organization had sufficient cash available for them?
Yes.
Can you describe that cash management process, please?
We had, over time, I had this position years ago. Different people had it over time. Once a week, on a set day, we would run reports on multi-data to see what our cash balance was. We would receive reports from the outside properties, the golf courses, and the hotels to see what their cash balance was. And they would do a projection for us of how much they needed for the week and how much they expected to receive for the week. Someone would put this together and see if an entity had money to spend or excess money to distribute. For example, if a rental property like Trump Tower had rental receipts that could distribute money to the owner, and if there was another project going on at the golf course, we could then fund that entity.
How often did the accounting department sort of prepare that cash acquisition analysis?
This was done on a weekly basis.
So if an entity had excess funds to distribute, where would it be distributed to?
It would be distributed to the owner.
With the owner here being the DJT account?
Prior to June 20th, it was the Donald J. Trump personal account. After June 20th, it should have been the Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust.
When you say June 20th, do you mean January 20th?
Sorry, January 20th, 2017.
If an entity needed money before January 20th, 2017, were funds transferred to that entity from the DJT account?
Yes.
After January 20th, 2017, were those funds transferred to or from the Revocable Trust account?
Yes.
You mentioned that at one point in time, you were responsible for preparing the cash acquisition analysis.
Yes.
Did you have any interactions with Mr. Trump about the cash acquisition analysis?
I would hand deliver the report to him once a week.
Did you have any particular interactions with him when giving him the report at any point in time?
Yes.
Can you describe that for the jury, please?
Early on, I think I was employed for about a year. President Trump was on the phone. I walked into his office, dropped a report on his desk, turned around, and he said, "Jeff, hold on a minute." Sorry. He said to who he was talking to, the person on the phone, "Hold on a minute," and turned around and said, "Jeff, you're fired," and started talking to the person on the phone again. I stood there until he got off the phone call, and he said, "You're not fired, but my cash balances went down from last week." He said, "I know you negotiated this." He said, "Now focus on my bills." It was a teaching moment. Just because somebody is asking for money, negotiate with them, talk to them. Just don't do it mindlessly. Think before you do it.
Are you familiar with a process by which the Trump Organization accounting staff cuts checks?
Yeah.
Describe that process generally, please.
An approved invoice is received. Deb would stamp it with her stamp. She would put a code on it. I believe she puts a dollar amount on the voucher, or when she puts it in the system, it creates a voucher. She would put a voucher number on it. So the voucher is in the multi-data system. When she was ready to pay it, she would select a voucher, and we would print the check on the checks that we had. She would attach a check to the invoice and give it to the person who's the signatory on the account. The check would be signed, and then she mailed them out.
You mentioned someone named Deb. Is that Deb Tarasoff you mentioned before?
Deb Tarasoff.
As a matter of course, did the Trump Organization ever cut a check if no invoice was submitted?
Of course not.
Is that true from checks cut from the trust account?
Usually we tried to get an invoice for any wire transfer check.
You mentioned that Ms. Tarasoff generally handled that process. Is that because she is the accounts payable supervisor?
She is the accounts payable department.
She is the department?
As of this point, and when I left, she was the only one left in accounts payable.
Must an invoice be approved before a check is cut?
Yes.
Who has authority to approve invoices?
President Trump when, before he became president, Alan Weisselberg, Donald Trump Jr., Eric Trump, when Ivanka Trump was working for us, Ivanka Trump, Alan Weisselberg, Matthew Calamari, those were the general approvers.
Did you have authority to approve any invoices?
No.
In the instances when you were going to Mr. Weisselberg to pay, how did you request approval?
When I had a piece of paper, I'm an old-timer. I like pieces of paper. I would bring it to Alan Weisselberg, ask him to approve it. If it came via email, I would forward the email and ask him to approve it.
If you send him an email for approval, did he sometimes send approval via email?
Yes.
Sometime in 2016 and 2017, if a check was approved and checks were cut, who had check signature authority from the DJT account?
The personal account, just President Trump.
In 2017, who had signature authority on the trust accounts?
The trust account, I believe, was Eric Trump, Donald Trump Jr., and Alan Weisselberg.
For checks that were cut from the trust account, how many signatures were required per check?
There were two different situations. Checks less than $10,000 could be signed by any of the three signatories. Checks over $10,000 had to be signed by two signatories.
Did the accounting department also handle expense reimbursements?
Yes.
Are you familiar with the process by which Trump Organization employees can be reimbursed for expenses they incurred on behalf of the Trump Organization?
Yes.
Please describe that process.
If they did their expenses, there was an expense report they would have to complete, which would entail the employee's name, the entity that the expense was incurred on behalf of, the date of the invoice, the vendor's name, the dollar amount. They would total off the amount. They would sign the expense sheet and get their supervisor to approve it. Once it was approved, it was sent to Deb for payment. Deb Tarasoff.
If an employee receives an expense reimbursement from the Trump Organization, is the employee required to report that reimbursement as taxable income on their tax return?
No.
So, if an employee paid out $100 for a Trump Organization expense, how much would that employee get as a reimbursement?
$100.
Generally speaking, if a lawyer receives payment for legal services rendered, is that taxable income for the attorney?
An outside attorney or a Trump Organization attorney?
An outside attorney.
An outside attorney, I would assume so, yes.
Let me hand up a thumb drive containing what has been marked for identification as Peoples 35, 36, 37, A to K 39, 40, 43, 44, 45, 48, 49, 54, 55, 81, and 93. Have you had an opportunity to review the documents contained on that thumb drive?
Yes, sir.
How do you know?
My scribble is on the thumb, my initial and today's date.
Did you look at that thumb drive earlier today?
Yes, very early today.
Did you look at all the files on the thumb drive?
Yes, sir.
You signed and dated it after you reviewed it?
Yes, sir.
Do the exhibits on this thumb drive include reports from the general ledger for the DJT account?
Yes.
Do exhibits on this thumb drive include reports for the general ledger for the trust accounts?
Yes.
Do these exhibits include emails including invoices approved for payment?
Yes.
Do these exhibits include notes regarding payments?
Yes.
Do these exhibits include Form 1099-S?
Yes.
Does the Trump Organization keep records relating to the checks it cuts?
Yes.
Does that include records for checks cut from the Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust Account?
Yes.
If I refer to that as the trust account going forward, will you know I mean the Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust Account?
Yes.
Does that include records for the checks cut from the DJT account?
Yes.
Do those records include invoices?
Yes.
Do those include entries for the general ledger?
No.
Can you explain?
We don't print out the general ledger, so we have... I'll try to describe it. When you print a check, the record for that check and the information that you put in is in multi-data. You can access it at any time. You can print it at any time. But we don't print out that general ledger for every single check we cut. So we have a copy of the check or the original check and the invoices behind it. We then scan it and try to attach it to the document in multi-data. So we don't really have the general ledger attached when we sign the check. I don't know if I'm off topic or not.
Setting aside whether you maintain the general ledger entries as part of the checks cut, does the Trump Organization separately maintain records of entries that are made in the general ledger?
Yes.
With respect to the records we just discussed, invoices, entries in the general ledger, and checks, was it the business practice of the Trump Organization to make and keep those records?
Yes.
And was it the business practice of the Trump Organization to make and keep notes regarding payments it made?
Yeah.
Were those records made and kept in the regular and ordinary course of business?
Yes.
Were those records made at the time of the transactions they reflected, or within a reasonable time thereafter?
Yes.
Was the person who made or kept those records under a business duty to do so accurately?
Yes.
Does the Trump Organization have an email system that allows you to send and receive messages?
Yes.
Does that email system record the dates and times that those messages were sent and received in?
Yes.
Is it part of the Trump Organization's business practice to make and keep records of email messages sent and received?
Yes.
Are those records kept in the regular and ordinary course of business?
Yes.
Does the email system keep records of those messages at the same time they're sent?
Yes.
Are business decisions sometimes made by email?
Yes.
Have you previously communicated with Michael Cohen using the Trump Organization's email system?
Yes.
What was your Trump Organization email address in the 2017 time period?
I believe it was jmcconey@trumporg.com.
In communicating with Mr. Cohen using your Trump Organization email account, did you ever email him at a Gmail account?
Yes.
Did you communicate with Alan Weisselberg using the Trump Organization's email system?
Yes.
In the 2017 time period, was Mr. Weisselberg's email address weisselberg@trumporg.com?
I believe so, yes.
Did you communicate with Deborah Tarasoff using Trump Organization email?
Yes.
In the 2017 time period, was her email address darasoff@trumporg.com?
I believe so, yes.
Were records of those communications stored in the Trump Organization's email system?
Yeah.
I offer into evidence the following exhibits: People's 37A to K, 39, 40, 43, 44, 45, 48, 49, 54, and 55.
Your Honor, we object to 37A through K, 45, 54, 55. I think there were other documents on that thumb drive that have not yet been offered, and we'll wait for those.
So, you're not objecting to 39, 40, 43, 44, 48, and 49?
Correct, Judge.
Those are received into evidence. As far as 37A through K, 45, 54, and 55, I find that the people have laid the business records foundation, but you reserve the right to object individually to these as we come across them.
Thank you, Judge.
Are you familiar with someone named Michael Cohen?
Yes.
How do you know Mr. Cohen?
Michael was employed by the Trump Organization for a number of years. I've had conversations with him by the coffee machine.
How many years did you work together?
I was there as long as he was, so I don't remember how long he was there. 5 years, 10 years?
When did he leave the Trump Organization?
January 27th. Well, I don't know when he left the Trump Organization. The last day he was paid through was January 27th, 2017.
What was his position in the Trump Organization?
He said he was a lawyer.
Did he work in the legal department?
I guess so.
Directing your attention to the time period around January 2017, did you become aware that Mr. Cohen needed to be reimbursed for money he was owed?
Yes.
How did you first become aware?
I had a conversation with Alan Weisselberg.
When did you have those conversations, that conversation?
I don't remember specifically. Sometime in January 2017?
Was anyone else present when you discussed this with Mr. Weisselberg?
I don't think so. I don't remember.
Please describe the conversation that you had.
Alan said we had to get some money to Michael. Reimburse Michael. He tossed a pad towards me, and I started taking notes on what Alan said. That's how I found out about it.
Okay. Tell us a little bit more about what Mr. Weisselberg said about the money that had to get paid to Mr. Cohen.
Well, there were two parts of the conversation. One reason I remember the January 27th date is I used to do payroll. Michael's last day was supposed to be January 20th, and we changed it to January 27th. I needed to know that, so I would stop paying him at a certain point in time. There was also information he had a complaint about his prior year bonus, so he wanted to get paid for that. And then there was some other money he was owed, so we just added everything up and came up with the amount we would have had to pay him.
You said in one conversation Mr. Weisselberg described these and asked you to take care of it?
It was one continuous conversation, one conversation.
And in that conversation, did Mr. Weisselberg also give you a bank statement with notes on it?
I don't think it was at that time. I got it at a later time.
Okay. Can you please describe the later time when you got the bank statement?
Alan gave me the bank statement and said, just keep it in the files.
Can we display People's Exhibit 35 from the thumb drive for the witness, the court, and the parties only? Mr. McConney, I'm now showing you a document that's been marked People's 35. Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
This is the bank statement that Alan gave me to put in the files.
Is there handwriting on this document?
There are 2 sets of handwriting on the bottom of the document.
Do you recognize the handwriting?
I recognize the handwriting on the left side of the page, but not the right side of the page.
Whose handwriting do you recognize on the left side of the page?
That belongs to Alan Weisselberg.
How do you recognize his handwriting?
I've read his handwriting for about 35 years.
Did Mr. Weisselberg sometimes take and keep notes that recorded financial decisions?
Yes.
A minute ago, you said Mr. Weisselberg gave you a bank statement when you were discussing the payments to Mr. Cohen. Is that right?
He gave it to me related to the payments. I don't remember exactly when he gave it to me. I took my notes at a later date. He gave me this bank statement.
By this bank statement, you're referring to the one being displayed right now, People's 35.
Yes, sir.
Is this a true and exact copy of the same piece of paper Mr. Weisselberg gave you in connection with those discussions?
Yes, sir.
Without describing the details, does Mr. Weisselberg's handwriting set out various calculations that reflect the total amount to be repaid in monthly intervals?
Yes.
I think you said this a minute ago. Did Mr. Weisselberg direct you to keep this document in the files?
Yes.
Did you keep it in the files?
Yes.
Where did you keep it?
I kept it in a payroll book I had in a locked drawer in my office. I actually had this document and another document stapled together in a book.
In a book in a locked drawer in your office?
Yes.
Can we display People's 36 for identification only to the people, the witness, the court, and the parties? Do you have People's 36?
It's the one with my chicken scratch on a trump pad, yes.
Are these the notes you just described taking during the conversation that you had with Mr. Weisselberg?
Yes.
This is your handwriting?
That's my handwriting.
Did you take these notes as Mr. Weisselberg was speaking to you?
Yes.
Is this a true and accurate copy of what you wrote down?
Yes.
Did Mr. Weisselberg tell you to write it down?
Yes, he kind of threw the pad at me and said, "Take this down."
Did you sometimes take and keep notes to record financial decisions?
Yes.
Without giving any details yet, do these notes also set out various calculations that reflect a total amount to be repaid at monthly intervals?
Yes.
Did you keep this document in the files as well?
Yes, this was the document that was stapled to the next statement, the bank statement we just looked at.
People's 35 and 36 were stapled together?
35, I'll take your word, it's 35 and 36. Yes.
Withdrawn. Your notes and Mr. Weisselberg's notes on the bank statement were stapled together, kept in the payroll book in the locked drawer in your office?
Yes.
Was it the business practice of the Trump organization to make and keep records of financial obligations to be paid from the DJT account?
Yes.
And the 2 documents we just looked at, were they made and kept as part of your regular course of business?
Yes.
Were these documents made at or about the time of the conversations they record?
Yes.
Were you and Mr. Weisselberg under a business duty to keep accurate records?
Yes.
I offer People's 35 and People's 36 into evidence.
No objection.
People's 35 and 36 are accepted into evidence.
Let's display People's 35 for everyone, please. Mr. McConney, let me direct your attention to the top left-hand corner of the document. What is the title of the document?
Account statement.
What does it say directly underneath that?
Simplified business checking.
In the top right corner, does it indicate anything about the financial institution?
Yes.
What does it say?
First Republic Bank.
What is the name on the bank account?
Essential Consultants, LLC, care of Michael Cohen.
Directing your attention now, about halfway down the page, to the section that reads Account Summary. Can you read the amount that is listed next to total withdrawals and debits?
$130,035.
Let me direct your attention lower down the page to the section that reads Account Activity. Can you read the transaction just below withdrawals and debits?
The first one was the date of October 27th. Domestic wire funds debit, Keith M. Davidson Associates, PLC.
What's the amount?
$130,000.
Now let me direct your attention to the handwriting on the bottom left of the page. Do you recognize that handwriting?
Yes, that's Alan Weisselberg's handwriting.
Can you please read what Mr. Weisselberg wrote on the bank statement?
Starts at the top. $180,000. It's underlined. Grossed up to $360,000. Add additional bonus, $60,000. The 2 amounts are added together for $420,000. Then he divides it by, that's at 12, which equals off to the right, that's $35,000 per month effective February 1st, 17.
So, I would like to make sure the jury understands each of the numbers in that equation, starting with the 180,000 figure. Where does the 180,000 figure in Mr. Weisselberg's notes come from?
TEU pull out and scroll up to the right. It's a combination of 2 amounts.
Can we show the entire bottom part of this document?
So it's a total of the domestic wire transfer for $130,000 plus the $50,000 paid to Red Finch for tech services.
So does the $180,000 amount reflect the total amount owed to Michael Cohen on his request for reimbursement for the $130,000 to Keith Davidson and $50,000 to Red Finch?
Yes.
Mr. Weisselberg's notes then say grossed up to $360,000, right?
Yes.
What does grossed up mean?
I don't know exactly what it meant, but he probably meant, so for tax purposes, if Michael recorded $360,000 income, he would net, assuming a 50% tax rate, $180,000.
Objection. Move to strike the last part of that.
Overruled.
So you are familiar with the concept of grossing up to offset taxes?
Yes.
You worked as a tax preparer. You have worked as tax preparer, I think you said, for 5 decades.
Yes.
Have you prepared individual tax returns for individual city residents?
Yes.
Do you have an understanding of whether some New York City residents are taxed approximately 50% on their income?
Between federal taxes, state taxes, New York state taxes, and New York City taxes, that's about right.
Do you know where Michael Cohen lived in 2017?
Yes.
Where did he live?
Do you want the address?
No, I'm sorry.
In New York City.
I'm sorry. Did he live in New York City?
Yes.
Thank you. Going back to the line in Mr. Weisselberg's handwritten notes that reads, grossed up attorney $360,000. I think you said this, but is that double $180,000?
Yes.
Moving to the next line in Mr. Weisselberg's notes. You testified a minute ago that this reads additional bonus $60,000, right?
Yes.
Did you discuss this additional bonus with Mr. Weisselberg?
No, on my sheet I wrote down $50,000, which is incorrect, but I just, whatever, that's what Alan told me. I didn't really discuss it with him.
Did you have an understanding that the payment was to include an additional bonus?
Yes, Michael was complaining that his bonus wasn't large enough for the prior year, so this was, I guess, to make up for whatever he thought he was owed.
And did those amounts then total $420,000?
Yes.
And you said Mr. Weisselberg's notes then show that total being divided by 12 to equal $35,000 per month, correct?
Yes.
Did he explain to you what that meant?
That was just math.
Did you have an understanding as to how the payments were going to be made?
Yes.
What was that understanding?
At that point in time, we were going to send a wire transfer to Michael for $35,000 per month, starting February 1st of 2017.
You mentioned a few times that you took notes during a conversation you had with Mr. Weisselberg about these repayments. Is that right?
Yes.
Starting at the top of this document, what is this?
This is the notes I was taking when Alan was talking to me and explaining to me what we owed Michael and how we were going to pay him.
And what this piece of paper that you were writing on?
I'm not sure I understand your question. It was a notepad.
That answers my question.
Okay.
And can you describe to the jury the circumstances when you wrote down these notes?
This was during the first meeting that when I found out that we owed Michael money, me and Alan threw a pad on the desk and said, just take notes. And Alan started rattling off stuff, some of which I wrote directly, some of which I did not.
Can you please read out loud the handwritten text starting at the top?
The top starts with Michael Cohen, pay through January 20th, 2017. That was the original line. The 20th was crossed out and replaced by 27th, which would be the day I took him off or the last day I would pay him through. Then it says bonus $50,000, then $180,000, $180,000 times 2 for taxes. The original number I had was just the $50,000 and the $180, and that's where the $230 comes from. The $230 is crossed out. And then when I add the second $180,000, I come up with a total of $410,000. Then he said, use $420, because I was possibly rattling the numbers back to Alan, and he said, no, the number $420. Instead of figuring out what I did right, I wrote $420. So I used $420, and I divided it by 12, so that's $35,000 per month effective February 1st, 17, which was 2017. We were to wire the funds monthly from President Trump's personal account, which was used to wire money from DJT. And underneath that, start $35,000 per month, January 2017. Mike to invoice us.
So did these notes refer to the same reimbursement as the handwritten notes on the First Republic Bank statement that we just discussed?
Yes.
What does pay through January 20th, which you started to say changed to through January 27th? What does that mean?
January 27th, I'm assuming, was the end of a payroll week. So that's when I was originally told to take Michael off payroll. That one was changed to January 27th. So that's the last day he was to be paid.
And that's the last day he was paid as an employee of the Trump organization?
Yes, I'm sorry. As an employee, yes.
And below that, you said the next line down reads bonus $50,000, right?
Yes.
And Mr. Weisselberg's notes said the additional bonus was $60,000. Is that right?
Yes.
What accounts for the difference?
I made a boo-boo. It was a fast conversation. I just scribbled down notes, and that's the number that I wrote down.
But the actual bonus amount was $60,000. Is that right?
Right. That's why the correction was when I had totaled to the 410,000, my bonus number was incorrect. That's when Alan said, use the 420,000. And I went back to correct the 50,000 to 60,000.
The next line down in your handwritten notes reads 180,000, right?
Yes.
Is that the same 180,000 reflected in Mr. Weisselberg's handwritten notes?
Yes.
And does that make up the 130,000 made to Keith Davidson and the 50,000 paid to Red Finch?
Yes.
Let me direct your attention to the next line down, which reads 180,000 times 2 for taxes, correct?
Yes.
What does times 2 for taxes refer to?
That was Alan just talking to me, telling me what he wanted to do. He wanted to double the 180,000 for taxes, so I just wrote the times 2 for taxes.
And you told me before that if a Trump Organization employee submitted an invoice for an expense reimbursement for $100, that employee would typically expect to get $100 back, right?
Yes.
And in this case, Mr. Cohen was receiving $360,000 back on a $180,000 expense?
I'm sorry, ask me that again.
Does that show that Mr. Cohen was receiving $360,000 back on a $180,000 expense?
Yes.
Were you aware of another expense reimbursement where a payment was doubled for taxes?
No.
Your notes then go on to add up the totals and sum them up to $410,000, is that right?
Yeah.
And you then wrote, use 420, right?
Yes.
Can you please explain that again?
That's when I told Alan what I came up with. He said, no, use 420.
And do you understand that to be the sum of those figures using the correct amount for the bonus?
Yes.
Let me direct your attention to the part of your notes where you wrote, wire monthly from DJT.
Yes.
What is the DJT a reference to?
That was a reference to President Trump's personal bank account.
And that was the MDS code for Mr. Trump's personal account?
Yes.
Let me direct your attention to the part of the note that reads, Mike to invoice us. Is Mike Michael Cohen?
Yes.
And what did you understand Mike to invoice us to mean?
If Michael wanted to get paid, he had to send us an invoice.
And is that based on the processes we discussed? Was that typical that someone would have to invoice the Trump Organization for any expense reimbursement?
Yes.
After the discussions, the conversations you had with Mr. Weisselberg that we spoke about, did there come a time that you were in touch directly with Mr. Cohen about processing the payments?
Yeah.
Display Peoples 39 in evidence. Do you recognize this message?
Yes.
What is it?
It's an email to Michael Cohen from me just reminding us to get us invoices or an invoice.
What is the date on the message that you sent?
February 6th, 2017.
Was this shortly after your conversation with Mr. Weisselberg in January 2017?
Yes.
What is the subject line on the email from you to Mr. Cohen?
It was $2 signs.
Please read your message to Mr. Cohen.
Mike, just a reminder to get me the invoice you spoke to Alan, meaning Alan Weisselberg that you spoke to Alan about.
What were the invoices that you were referring to in this email message?
Going back to my handwritten notes, I was expecting invoices. Alan probably called me and said, get the invoices from Michael. So I sent Michael an email to send us the invoices, or at least an invoice for that month.
Can we display just for the witness, the court, and counsel, Peoples 37A? Do you recognize this message?
Yes.
What do you recognize it to be?
It's an email. Well, it is a series of emails, starting on the bottom to Alan Weisselberg from myself, and then Alan Weisselberg replies to it. And then I forward an email or send an email to Deborah Tarasoff.
And this was one of the emails that we talked about that was on the thumb drive that you reviewed, correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, I offer 37A into evidence.
Objection.
Please approach.
At sidebar.
Yes, Mr. Bove?
Thank you, Judge. This is an email that we would present as an example of the embedded hearsay issue. And there are a couple of messages from Cohen on this thread that we object to coming in on the Business Records Foundation. There has to be some other basis for their admissibility. To the extent they're not being offered for their truth, we would ask for a limiting instruction that makes that clear to the jury. And so I am specifically referring to the Cohen email at 7:59 a.m. and then the email invoice that he sends at 11:58 a.m. Those are factual assertions by Mr. Cohen.
Can you read it to me? Can you read to me what you believe the embedded hearsay is?
Yes, the 7:59 a.m. email of, this is an email from Mr. Cohen to the witness. It says, Jeff, sorry for the delay, and thank you for the reminder. Please have the monthly checks for January and February made payable to Michael D. Cohen, Esquire, and the address is redacted. And then there is a salutation in that email, and that's one of the factual assertions.
And the other one?
And the second one, if I could just show it to Your Honor. This is the 11:58 a.m. email, and it's an exhibit which is an invoice that Cohen sends to Mr. McConney. And our objection is that this is not a business record. It's not a Trump Organization business record. At most, it's a business record of Mr. Cohen. We assume it's coming in and not being offered for its truth, and we would ask for a limiting instruction that it's being admitted, not for its truth.
So, Your Honor, as to a second one, this is the evidence of the actual business transaction. And among other things, Mr. Cohen is a co-conspirator. We have already laid that foundation. So he, setting aside that this is past business records that Mr. McConney laid the foundation for, receiving of the invoices by email and incorporating it into the Trump Organization and relying on them for Trump Organization business, makes them admissible. So this is admissible both as under the business records exception and the co-conspirator exception.
And you are not asking for any limiting instruction?
No, Your Honor, I don't think any limited instruction is appropriate.
Okay.
Your Honor, as to the 7:59 a.m. email, I would make the same argument. There is an initial request for payment. Mr. Cohen, you can tell from email context, was responding to Mr. McConney's request for an invoice. Mr. McConney will testify that he then forwarded up to say that that wasn't enough for an invoice, but it was part of the process for requesting and accepting receiving payment.
Unlike the situation that came up previously where the people were offering certain emails into evidence as business records, actually, I think there was an exception. In any event, I find that these are business records. They are co-conspirator statements. Even though this is an invoice from Mr. Cohen, part of the business records that are being kept by the Trump Organization. So your objection is overruled.
Thank you, Judge.
Sidebar concluded.
The objection is noted and overruled. These exhibits are accepted into evidence.
Please publish Exhibit 37A. And let's go to the first exhibit. Mr. McConney, do you recognize this message?
Yes.
I want to ask you a few questions about it, but first let me ask. Have you ever seen an email message printed out like this before, with a series of messages one after the other?
Yes.
Do you have an understanding that messages may appear in reverse chronological order, with the most recent message on the top or on the first page, and the older message following or below the first messages?
Yes.
Let me direct your attention to the bottom of page 3, going on to the top of page 4. And if we could have that displayed and zoomed in if that's possible. Thank you. Can you read that message, please?
Just a reminder to get me the invoice you spoke to Alan about. Thanks, Jeff.
Does that appear to be the same message that we just discussed where you emailed Mr. Cohen on February 6th?
I believe so, yes.
Looking just above that message, what does the next message show?
It's an email from Michael. Jeff, sorry for the delay and thank you for the reminder. Please have the monthly checks for January and February made payable to Michael D. Cohen, Esquire, and sent to hope you are well and see you soon.
And directing your attention to the next message just above that. Can you read out loud your response to Mr. Cohen?
Mike, please send me invoices so I can have the checks cut.
Why did you ask for his invoices?
I need an invoice to get a check cut or wire released.
So the email he had sent you in response to your first message, that was not sufficient for you to cut a check?
No, a lot of people ask for money. I need an invoice.
Okay, let's take a look at the next message in the chain, and can you read his response, please?
Jeff, please remind me of the monthly amount.
And let's look at the next message. Your response? $35,000 per month. And when did you send that message?
February 14th at 10:34 a.m.
And how did Mr. Cohen respond to that message?
He typed an invoice into his response email, which was basically an email from Michael D. Cohen, Esquire, dated February 14th. Do you want me to read the whole thing or?
Please do.
Dated February 14th, 2017, it says, Invoice. It's addressed to Alan Weisselberg, care of Donald J. Trump, 725 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10022. Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the months of January and February 2017. January 2017, $35,000. February 2017, $35,000. Thank you. Michael Cohen.
Did you consider this sufficient to serve as an invoice to process these payments?
As long as it got approved, yes.
Did you ever see a retainer agreement?
I did not.
Let's go to the first page of this exhibit. And can you tell us what happened next in this series of communications?
This is the page after the one we just looked at?
Correct.
Yes. February 14th. I sent an email to Alan Weisselberg on February 14th at 2 p.m. Alan, please approve the below invoice for payment. Thanks, Jeff.
And let me direct your attention to the next message right above that one. How did Mr. Weisselberg respond?
Okay. Okay to pay as per agreement with Don and Eric.
Who did you understand Don to refer to?
Donald J. Trump, Jr.
And who did you understand Eric to refer to?
Eric Trump.
I think you testified earlier. Were Don and Eric the trustees of the trust at the time?
Yes.
And were Don and Eric both approved signers for checks the trust at the time?
I believe so, yes.
What was their role in approving invoices at the time?
They owned the company. They could approve any invoice they wanted to. I'm sorry, they didn't own the company. They were running the company. They were entitled or were allowed to approve any invoice they wanted.
Did you send this invoice to the legal department?
No.
Was it typical for the legal department to review requests for legal payment?
Yes.
Let me direct your attention to the top message in the chain. Can you tell me what that is?
I forward Alan's, well, did we go through Alan's approval? Yes, I forwarded Alan's approval on the other email to Deb Tarasoff, accounts payable, and asked, please pay from the trust, meaning Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust, total expenses for the total amount. Use that account for any payment, otherwise it just won't go anywhere. Put in quotes the retainer for the months of January and February 2017 in the description. And then there is a description, which is a piece of input data, so that we put that so that it would describe what you are paying.
When you described earlier your handwritten notes, you wrote down pay monthly from DJT, correct?
Yes.
And that was to indicate that the expenses were to be paid from the DJT personal account. Is that right?
Yes.
That account is different than the trust account?
Yes.
Why in this email did you ask Ms. Tarasoff to make this payment from the trust account instead of from the DJT account?
At that point in time, we were paying the president's personal expenses instead of from the DJT personal account, from the DJ Trust account. I'm sorry, the DJT Trust account.
Now, your email asks Ms. Tarasoff to post the legal expenses. Is that correct?
Yes.
Please explain what you meant by post the legal expenses.
Whenever you make a payment, you have to choose how it's going to be indicated in the general ledger category, how to put the payment, where to post the payment to. So when you print the general ledger, it summarizes the expenses in that account. There are a number of accounts you can post it to. We were paying a lawyer, so I said to posted it to legal expenses in the general ledger.
What is the general ledger code for legal expenses?
51505.
And in the next sentence, you said, put retainer for the months of January and February 2017 in the description, right?
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
I was just taking some information from the invoice, so Deb would know what to put in multi-data and in MDS. And that part of the information prints on the general ledger when you print the general ledger.
And once that description is in the general ledger system, who can see it?
Anybody who looks in the general ledger.
I'm sorry.
You can look on the screen. You can run a report. If I run a report, anybody that gets the report can see it.
And did the Trump Organization's outside accountants also have access to those descriptions?
When we printed the general ledger for them, yes. They didn't have access to our general ledger package. We had to print reports for them and get them reports of documents.
And why did you print out reports and give them to the accountants?
Usually, most of the time, it was for tax purposes, to prepare a tax return or a financial statement.
Did you expect that they would review this expense account at the end of the year for tax purposes?
Yes, this is one of the accountants that we went over this with, Donald Bender and myself. Donald Bender is one of the partners of Mazars, who oversaw the account expenses from the Trump accounts.
Did you know that outside accountants would review this and that those outside accountants would have access to this information?
Yes.
Is one of the reasons for putting this information in the general ledger for when the outside accountants who had access to these descriptions, in order to understand the description of legal fees as information that the accountants would need to prepare tax returns or financial statements?
Yes, and part of the conversation, it would start a conversation if they needed more information.
After submitting and getting approval on this invoice labeled the request for payment for January and February 2017, did Mr. Cohen submit other invoices?
Yes.
To your recollection, did he submit one invoice each month after that in 2017?
For calendar year 2017, yes.
Your Honor, I offer into evidence People's 37B.
Same objection as noted previously.
Same objection, same response from the people?
Yes, Your Honor.
37B is accepted into evidence.
Please display 37B publicly. Mr. McConney, Do you have 37B on your screen?
Yes, sir.
Do you recognize this document?
Yes, sir.
What is it?
It's from the bottom going up, it's an email from Michael Cohen to myself and Alan Weisselberg. It was an invoice for the month of March.
What's the date on this email?
February 16th, 2017.
I'm sorry, is that the date on the email itself?
Oh, I'm sorry. The date of the email was Thursday, March 16th, 2017 at 11:58 a.m.
Can you read out loud the message beginning with, Dear Alan?
Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the month of March 2017.
And what does it say below that?
March 2017, $35,000.
And take a look at the top of the page, page 1 now, please, and tell us what it shows.
At the top is an email from myself to Alan on March 16th. Okay, it was sent to Alan and Deb. Deb, please pay post to same GL as last month.
What does GL mean?
That's accountant speak for general ledger.
And what did you mean by post the same GL as last month?
Basically, whatever I told you last month, post it to legal fees, put the description in, just follow the same pattern routine.
So you were asking Ms. Tarasoff to post this to legal expenses?
Yes.
Did there come a time when you switched from using the trust account to using the DJT account to pay the invoices from Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
And you previously told us that Mr. Trump was the only signatory on checks cut from the DJT account. Is that right?
That's correct.
Where was he located in 2017?
Washington, D.C.
So, when you switched and started paying Mr. Cohen's reimbursement checks from the DJT accounts instead of the trust account, what did that mean in terms of getting the check signed?
Somehow, we would have to get a package down to the White House, get it to the president, get the president to sign the checks, get the checks returned to us, and then have the checks mailed out. A whole new process for us.
And is that because the signatures for the trust account were located in New York?
I'm sorry, yes.
Can we display People's 40 in evidence? Mr. McConney, do you have that on your screen?
Yes, sir.
Do you recognize this email?
Yes, sir.
What is it?
On the bottom, it starts with an email from Michael Cohen to me. Read it.
Please do.
Did you receive the invoice from me for March? Thanks and hope all is well.
And what's the date of this email?
March 28th, 2017.
And let's go up in this exhibit. And can you please read your response?
Okay. Yes, I'll check status tomorrow. DJT needs to sign check.
What did you mean by DJT needs to sign check?
Well, the check was drawn out of President Trump's personal account. We had to get it down to the White House for the president to sign it.
I offer People's 37C into evidence.
Judge, we will have the same objection to each exhibit in the 37 series.
And the people will have the same response?
Yes, Your Honor.
Your objection is noted and overruled. 37C is accepted into evidence.
Mr. McConney, do you have that document in front of you on your screen?
Yes, sir.
Do you recognize this document?
Yes, sir.
What is it?
That's an email. Well, it's a series of emails to Michael and Alan and myself and Deb Tarasoff.
Let's go to the third page, please. Can you describe this document?
This looks like an invoice from Michael Cohen, looking for payment for the month of April 2017 in the amount of $35,000.
Was this invoice attached to the email we just looked at?
Can you take this off the screen and just so I can see the email?
Yes. Can we go back to this one, please?
Yes, it says attachments MDCPC April. That should be the invoice that was attached to the email.
Thank you. Can we go back to page 3, please? Displayed. And can you read the invoice starting below the date?
It's addressed to Alan Weisselberg, care of Donald J. Trump, 725 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10022. Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the month of April 2017. April 2017, $35,000. Thank you. Michael Cohen.
Now let's go back to the first page of this document. And can we start at the bottom part of the message and please let us know what this shows?
It's an email from Michael Cohen to Alan Weisselberg. It says, Alan, happy holiday. I'm attaching the April invoice for processing. Thank you.
What's the date of the email on Mr. Cohen to Mr. Weisselberg?
April 13th, 2017.
And let's go to the next message in the chain just above that. And can you zoom out a little bit more just so we can see what comes below that as well? What does this show?
Okay, so we've got the email from Michael to Alan. The second one was an email on Thursday, April 13th, 2017, from Alan to myself.
So Mr. Weisselberg forwarded to you Mr. Cohen's email and invoice, is that right?
Yes.
Did he include any message in the email?
No.
Let's go up from there, and please display the top message. Can you please tell the jury what this shows?
It's an email from myself and somebody else. I'm assuming that's Alan's email to Deb Tarasoff. And it says, please pay.
What's the date of that email?
April 13th, 2017.
Did you understand from Mr. Weisselberg's forward to you that the invoice was approved to pay?
Yes.
Let's take that down. Your Honor, I offer into evidence 37D through 37K.
Your objection is noted. Overruled. Those exhibits are accepted into evidence.
Please display 37D. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, sir.
What is it?
It's a series of emails between Michael Cohen, Alan Weisselberg, myself, and Deb Tarasoff.
Let's display the second page of this exhibit. Can you describe this document?
It's an invoice from Michael Cohen for the month of May 2017.
Can you read the text of the invoice below the date?
Mr. Alan Weisselberg, care of Donald J. Trump, 725 Fifth Avenue, New York, 10022. Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the month of May 2017. May 2017, $35,000. Thank you. Michael Cohen.
Now let's go back to the first page of this document. And directing your attention to the first message on the bottom of the page. What does this show?
It's an email from Michael to Alan Weisselberg.
What is the date of Mr. Cohen's email to Mr. Weisselberg?
May 22nd, 2017.
What's the subject?
May invoice.
Please read the message.
Alan, hope all is well. Please find attached the May invoice. Also, please call me to discuss the last open foundation matter. Thank you.
Let's go up in this correspondence and show the rest of the email above that, if we can. Starting the middle and moving up. Please tell us what this shows.
This is an email from Alan Weisselberg to me, which is basically forwarding Michael's email. Then I forward all of those other emails to Deb Tarasoff and ask her to please pay the invoice.
Thank you. Please publish People's 37E. Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
A series of emails between Michael Cohen, Alan Weisselberg with myself, and Deb Tarasoff.
Let's go to the second page, please. What does this show?
This is an email from Michael Cohen to Alan Weisselberg on June 16th, 2017.
And please read the message starting with, Dear Alan.
Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the month of May 2017 and June 2017, May 2017, $35,000. June 2017, $35,000. Thank you, Michael Cohen.
Thank you. And just above that message, can you take a look and let us know what happened next?
Alan Weisselberg forwarded me the email he received from Michael Cohen.
And let's go to the top of the page. Can you describe that message and read it out loud, please?
I then forward that email being Alan Weisselberg's email to Deb Tarasoff. I said, Deb, please pay June and put a stop on the April 13th, 2017 check number 2639 cut out of DJT and replace it. Any questions, please call me. Thanks.
Why did you ask Ms. Tarasoff to put a stop on the check?
Michael was waiting for payment for one of his months, and it looks like we never got a check back from the White House, so we stopped it and reissued it.
So is it correct that the original April check for the April payment was lost?
Yes, it was lost. Somebody couldn't find it. I guess it was the same as lost. Lost.
Please display People's 37F. Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
It's an email or a series of emails between Michael Cohen, Alan Weisselberg, myself, and Deborah Tarasso.
Let's take a look at the second page. Can you describe this, please?
That's an invoice from Michael Cohen for the month of July 2017.
And please read what the invoice reads below the date.
Invoice. Mr. Alan Weisselberg, care of Donald J. Trump, 725 Fifth Avenue, New York, 10022. Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the month of July 2017. Thank you, Michael Cohen. Michael.
Does this invoice include a specific amount to be paid?
It does not.
Did you have an understanding as to the specific amount to be paid?
I did.
What was that understanding?
$35,000.
And what was that understanding based on?
Based on the prior invoices and the notes that I took in Alan's office.
Turning back to the first page, what is the message on the bottom of that page?
The email from Michael Cohen to Alan Weisselberg. Dear Alan, hope you are well and getting a chance to enjoy the summer despite all of the nonsense. Speak soon.
And what's the date and time of that email?
Tuesday, July 11th, 2017, 9:35 a.m.
Let's look above that. And please tell us what the message is right above.
There is no message. Just Alan forwards to me Michael's email.
Did you understand that to be approval to pay?
Yes.
And what's the message at the top of this page?
Then I, in turn, forwarded the below emails and the invoice to Deb Tarasoff and asked her to pay.
What's the date of your email to Ms. Tarasoff?
July 11th, 2017.
And when you forwarded this email to Ms. Tarasoff, what amount did you have an understanding that she would pay?
$35,000.
Please display People's 37G. Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
It's a series of emails between Michael Cohen, Alan Weisselberg, and myself, and Deborah Tarasoff.
And take a look at the bottom of the page, please. Bottom of the first page, and please describe.
It's an email from Michael on August 2017 to Alan Weisselberg.
What does Mr. Cohen's email say?
Alan, hope all is well and you get a chance to enjoy part of the summer. See you soon. Yours, Michael D. Cohen, Esquire, personal attorney to President Donald J. Trump. You have the address as 30 Rockefeller Plaza, 23rd floor, New York, New York.
Let's take a look at the second page. What do you recognize this to be?
This is an invoice from Michael Cohen for the month of August 2017.
And starting below the address, what is the read?
August before, after the address. Okay. Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the month of August 2017. Thank you, Michael Cohen.
Does this invoice indicate an amount?
It does not.
Did you have the same understanding as to the amount requested?
Yes.
And what was that based on?
Prior month's invoices and the conversation that I had with Alan in his office in January.
Now let's go back to the first page and immediately above the email from Mr. Cohen to Mr. Weisselberg.
Alan forwarded Michael Cohen's email to me.
Was there a message in his forward?
There was not.
Did you understand that to be approval to pay?
Yes.
Let's go to the top of the page. And please describe.
It's an email to Deb from me. I forwarded Michael's and Alan's emails, Michael's invoice to Deb Tarasoff, and asked her to please pay the attached invoice.
What's the date that you forwarded that email?
August 1st, 2017.
And again, did you have an amount in mind that Tarasoff would pay?
Yes.
What amount was that?
$35,000.
Is that based on the same understanding?
Yes.
Let's display People's 37H. Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
It's a series of emails from Michael Cohen, but between and among Michael Cohen, Alan Weisselberg, myself, and Deb Tarasoff.
Let's turn to the second page. What is this document?
It's an invoice from Michael Cohen for the months of August and September.
What's the date on this invoice?
September 11th, 2017.
And can you read the address and message, please?
It's Mr. Alan Weisselberg, care of Donald J. Trump, 725 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10022. Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the months of August and September 2017. Thank you, Michael Cohen.
Does this invoice include an amount?
It does not.
Did you have an understanding as to the amount being requested?
Yes.
What was that amount?
$35,000.
What was that understanding based on?
Based on prior invoices and my conversation with Alan in January.
Let's go back to the first page. And let's look at the bottom of the first page. And can you describe that message?
It's an email from Michael to Alan Weisselberg, September 11th, 2017. Alan, hope you are holding up and not damaged by the hurricane to your Florida home. Be well. Yours, Michael D. Cohen, Esquire, personal attorney to President Donald J. Trump, 30 Rockefeller Plaza, 23rd floor, New York, New York, 10112.
And turning immediately above that message, can you please describe what happened next in the communication?
Alan forwarded to me Michael's email and invoice.
And what's the date of that forward?
September 11th, 2017.
Did you understand by this email that Mr. Weisselberg had approved payment on this invoice?
Yes.
Let's look at the next message above that. In forwarding the email and invoice and the email chain to Ms. Tarasoff without any email message, did you intend for her to pay the invoice?
Yes.
Please display People's 37I. Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
It's a series of emails between Michael Cohen, Alan Weisselberg, myself, and Deborah Tarasoff.
Take a look at the bottom of the first page, please, and describe this message.
The email is from Michael to Alan Weisselberg, and the message is, hope you are well.
What's the date of that email before we move on?
October 18th, 2017.
Okay. Let's turn to the third page, please. What is this document?
It's an invoice from Michael Cohen.
And what's the date on that invoice?
October 18th, 2017.
What does the invoice read?
Just the body of the whole thing.
Why don't you just read the body this time?
Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the month of October 2017.
Let's go back to the first page, please. And immediately above the email from Mr. Cohen and Mr. Weisselberg, can you describe what happens next in the communication?
Alan forwards Michael's email to me.
On what date?
October 18th, 2017.
And in forwarding you the email and invoice, did you understand that to be Mr. Weisselberg's approval to pay?
Yes.
Let's look at the next message above that. And what is this message?
This is an email to Deb Tarasoff from me asking Deb to please pay.
What's the date of your email to Ms. Tarasoff?
October 18th, 2017.
Let's look at, can we display People's 37J? Do you have that on your screen, Mr. McConney?
Yes, sir.
Do you recognize this document?
Yes, sir.
What is it?
It's a series of emails between Michael Cohen, Alan Weisselberg, myself, and Deborah Tarasoff.
Okay. Let's go to the bottom of the first page, please. And can you describe this message?
The message, Alan, happy Thanksgiving and hope all is going well.
Who is it from and to?
It's from Michael Cohen to Alan Weisselberg.
And what date?
November 20th, 2017.
Let's turn to the third page, please. What is this document?
This is an invoice from Michael Cohen.
What's the date of the invoice?
November 20th, 17.
And please read the invoice language.
Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the month of November 2017.
Does this invoice include the amount that's requested?
It does not.
Did you have an understanding as to the amount that was being requested?
Yes.
What was that amount?
Based on prior invoices and my conversation with Alan in January.
And what did you understand the amount to be?
$35,000.
Let's turn back to the first page. And immediately above the email from Mr. Cohen to Mr. Weisselberg, can you describe the next message in the communication?
It's an email from Alan Weisselberg to myself on November 20th, 2017.
Is there any language in the body of the email other than Mr. Weisselberg's signature block?
No.
In forwarding you the email from Mr. Cohen and the invoice, did you understand Mr. Weisselberg to approve payment on the invoice?
Yes.
Please look at the top of the page and describe the next message in the communication.
It's an email to Deb Tarasoff from myself on November 20th, 2017.
And what does your email to Ms. Tarasoff say?
Deb, please pay the attached invoice.
Let's take that down. And can you please display People's 37K? What is this?
It's a series of emails between Michael Cohen, Alan Weisselberg, myself, and Deborah Tarasoff.
Let's look at the bottom of the first page of this document, please. Can you read us that message?
It's an email from Michael Cohen to Alan Weisselberg, December 2017. Alan, I want to wish you a happy holiday and hope all is well.
Thank you. Let's turn to the third page, please. What is this?
That's Michael Cohen's invoice.
What's the date on the invoice?
December 1st, 2017.
And please read the language on the invoice.
Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the month of December 2017.
And turning back to the first page, immediately above the email from Mr. Cohen and Mr. Weisselberg, can you describe what happened next in the communication?
Alan Weisselberg forwarded Michael's email to me on December 1st, 2017.
Other than Mr. Weisselberg's Trump Organization signature block, is there any other language in the message that got on that forward?
There is not.
In sending you the email and invoice from Mr. Cohen for December, did you understand Mr. Weisselberg to be approving payment on that invoice?
Yes.
If you remember, and I can show you if you don't, did the invoice that you looked at on page 3 include an amount requested?
It did not.
What did you understand the amount requested to be?
$35,000.
And what was the basis of your understanding?
Prior invoices from Michael and my conversation or meeting with Alan in January of 2017.
Okay, now looking at the top of this first page, can you describe your next message in the communication?
I forward Alan's and Michael's emails to Deb Tarasoff on December 1st, 2017.
Is the series of invoices that we just discussed consistent with the $35,000 monthly payments reflected in the handwritten notes that you took in January 2017?
Yes.
And do these invoices for 12 payments of $35,000 total $420,000?
Yes.
Did you ever direct Ms. Tarasoff to make any further $35,000 payments to Mr. Cohen?
Not that I remember, no.
Did you ever see any other invoices from Mr. Cohen?
Not that I remember.
So, did the payments stop in December 2017 after the December 1st invoice we just saw?
Yes, I believe so.
And so far as you understood, did these payments satisfy the obligation that you discussed with Mr. Weisselberg in January of 2017?
They paid the same dollar amount as was on that statement in my notes, yes.
Okay. Let's display People's 45 in evidence, unless Your Honor suggests that now is a good time for a break.
Is this a good time to take a break?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, jurors, let's take our mid-morning recess. You can step out.
Please leave your books on the chair. All rise.
You may be seated, sir. You may step down.
Witness excused.
Mr. Bove, it appeared that you were about to say something before we broke. Did you want to go on the record with anything?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay, enjoy your break.
Thank you.
Remain seated. Come to order. Part 59 is back in session.
Let's get Mr. McConney, please.
Witness entering.
Let's get the jury, please. Mr. McConney, you're still under oath.
All rise. Jury entering. Whereupon the jury entered the courtroom and was properly seated.
Please be seated.
Case on trial continued. Will the parties stipulate that all jurors are present and properly seated?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Colangelo.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning again, Mr. McConney.
Good morning, sir.
Just before the break, we were discussing the invoices for payments that totaled $420,000 in 2017. Do you remember that discussion?
Yes, sir.
Can I display for the witness, the court, and the parties only, People's 45? Do you recognize this as one of the documents on the thumb drive you reviewed?
Yes, sir.
What is this document?
It is one of the reports we can run from the MDS accounts payable system.
Is there any handwriting on this document?
Yes, there is.
Do you recognize whose handwriting it is?
I do.
Whose handwriting is it?
Deborah Tarasoff.
I offer People's 45 in evidence.
No objection.
Accepted into evidence.
Let's publish that document, please. Mr. McConney, can you describe what this document is?
It's called a query voucher. It's a report that is run for a specific vendor. In this case, it's run for any entity that pays this specific vendor. Any check that was paid during the period January 1st, 2017 to January 5th, 2018. It includes various information, voucher number, which is a tracking system, the company it was paid from, the vendor's name, a small description of what the invoice was for. The status, you can run it if the invoice was paid or unpaid. You can void it, or you can run multiple options. The date of the invoice amount, the date paid, check number, and a due date, which I think is an automatically generated date.
You mentioned that this report can show payments made to a particular vendor. Is that right?
Yes.
Who is the vendor in this instance?
Michael D. Cohen, Esquire.
Who printed this document?
I don't know.
You said before that you recognized the handwriting on the right-hand side?
The handwriting, I assume she wrote it, but I don't know if she did.
By she, you are referring to Deborah Tarasoff?
Yes, she is the only person in accounts payable, so I figure she ran it. I don't know 100%.
Can you describe the first column, please?
It says voucher number.
And what is a voucher number?
When you are sending or the software puts an invoice up or into the accounts payable system, it creates a voucher, and an invoice number is automatically assigned by Multidata MDS.
Describe the second column, please.
Comp, which is short for company, that would be the company that paid the invoice.
And which company does appear in the comp column on this query voucher summary?
DJT Rev, it stands for Donald J. Trump. Revocable Trust, and DJT is President Trump personally.
And does DJT Rev and DJT indicate the entity that issued a given payment?
Yes.
Across the top, does this document show a range for the date paid?
Yes.
And what is that range?
These are for checks that were cut and issued between, from, and including January 1st, 2017 through and including January 5th of 2018.
So is this a report that was run on January 5th, 2018 to identify all payments to Michael D. Cohen, Esquire, in 2017?
That's what I don't know if that's the purpose, but that's what it does reflect.
What does the handwriting on the top write sum up, if anything?
That's the total of the first three payments which were paid out of the DJT Revocable Trust or the President's Trust.
What's the total amount?
$105,000.
Do you see the handwriting below that on the right-hand side?
Yes.
What does that handwriting show?
$315,000.
Do you have an understanding of what that denotes? Do you have an understanding of what that $315,000 refers to?
That's the total of the checks that were cut out of the president's personal bank account.
And is that also the total of the checks that were cut from DJT as an entity?
I am sorry, the DJT account, yes.
And does the bottom of this report display the total amount that was paid in 2017?
Yes.
What is that total?
$420,000.
You testified earlier that MDS can run reports for certain expenses in a given account. Is that right?
I am sorry. Can you ask that again?
Can MDS run reports showing payments that were posted to a particular expense code for a given expense?
Yes, I mean, given an account with an expense code is the same thing in my world, in my language.
Let me ask that question differently then. Can MDS run a report showing certain expense types that were paid from a given entity?
Yes.
So could it run a report showing everything booked to the account for legal expenses for a given entity and year?
Yes.
Please display only for the court, the witness and parties, People's 54. Mr. McConney, let me know when you have it on your screen.
I have it on the screen.
Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
Is this one of the documents that was on the thumb drive?
Yes.
What is this document?
This is a detailed general ledger report from MDS.
And what's the entity that the detailed general ledger report relates to?
It is the Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust.
I offer People's 54 in evidence.
Objection.
Approach.
Discussion is held at sidebar on the record.
Your Honor, as far as I can tell, Government Exhibit 54 relates to a period from 2018 forward. If that's correct, we don't see the relevance of those entries in this case.
Your Honor, People's 54 is an extract from the general ledger for the revocable trust account that shows all payments made, coded to the legal expense code. The relevance is that there are no payments to Michael Cohen, Esquire from the trust account for 2018 that were coded to 51505.
Okay, I will allow it.
Discussion at sidebar concluded, and the following occurred in open court.
Overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor. Is Peoples 54 in evidence?
Yes, it is.
Can we publish Peoples 54? Mr. McConney, I think you said this is a withdrawn. What is this document?
It's a detailed general ledger report that is printed out on the MDS.
And take a look at the upper left-hand corner of page 1. What's the company name?
DJT Rev.
Which entity does this relate to?
The Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust.
What's the time period?
It's for transactions during the period January 1st, 2018 through December 31st, 2018, calendar year 2018.
Let's turn to the second page of this document, and let me direct your attention to the bottom of the page. What's the last account code listed on the page?
The account code is 51505.
What does that account code respond to?
Legal expenses.
Did you testify that you reviewed this document earlier?
Yeah.
What does the rest of the document show?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Let's take this down and go to page 3. Can you tell us what page 3 shows?
They are expenses or payments that were posted to account 51505, legal expense.
Does it show them in a particular order?
They are in date order.
Let's display page 4. What does this page show?
The same thing, the legal expenses posted to account 51505.
And is that from the DJT Rev entity?
Yes, so it's still part of the DJT General Ledger.
For 2018?
This is for part of 2018, yes.
Let's advance to the next page. What does this show?
The top of the page shows postings to account 51505, legal expense postings for payments. In the bottom, we start a new general ledger account, 51506, which are payments to an expense account called Accounting and Auditing, payments to accountants.
And have you reviewed the entries in the legal expense code on this exhibit?
Yes.
Does that show all of the charges to the account for legal expenses for the trust account in 2018?
Yes.
Were there any payments to Michael Cohen from that account in 2018 that was billed to legal expense?
No.
Let's display, just for the witness, the court and parties. Peoples 55. Please let me know, Mr. McConney, when you have it on your screen.
It's on my screen.
Do you recognize this?
Yes, sir.
What is it?
It is a detailed general ledger printed from MDS.
What's the company identified in the upper left-hand corner?
DJT.
And what's the time period for this report?
Calendar year 2008.
Is this one of the documents that you reviewed from the thumb drive we discussed earlier?
Yes, it is.
I offer Peoples 55 into evidence.
No objection.
Accepted into evidence.
Let's start on the first page, Mr. McConney. Please go ahead and tell the jury what this is.
It's a detailed general ledger printout for MDS.
What's the date of the transactions that it reports?
Calendar year 2018.
Take a look at the upper left-hand corner. Is this a report from the general ledger for the DJT account?
Yes, his personal account.
Let's turn to the second page. Now I will direct your attention to the bottom of the page. Does this show entries for legal expenses in 2018?
This paragraph shows, yes, this page shows one entry to account 51505, legal expense.
What's the date of that entry?
January 2nd, 2018.
Please advance to the next page. And Mr. McConney, please review that page and let me know when you have had a chance to look it over.
I looked it over.
What do these show?
These are continuing reports for the legal expense account for 51505 for 2018.
Can you advance to the next page? Is this a continuing report for legal expense for 2018 from the DJT account?
Yes, it is.
Please advance to the next page. And can you let us know what that is?
It is a continuation payment posted to expenses in 2018 for account 51505.
Please advance to the next page. And what is this?
More legal expenses posted to legal expense account 51505 for 2018.
Have you had an opportunity to review each page of this exhibit?
Yes.
Does this document show all of the charges to the account for legal expenses for the DJT entity in 2018?
Yes.
Were there any payments to Michael Cohen from the DJT account in 2018 that were billed to legal expenses?
No.
Mr. McConney, we can go ahead and take that down. And can we display Peoples 43 in evidence? Mr. McConney, do you see Peoples 43?
I do.
Do you recognize this document?
I do.
Can you tell the jury what it is?
It is a detailed general ledger report from MDS.
What company and year?
The company is DJT Rev for calendar years 2017 and 2018.
And does this show the 3 payments to Michael Cohen from the trust account in response to the approved invoices discussed for January, February, and March 2017?
Yes.
And does this show what account those payments were coded to?
Yes.
Does this record the description of a retainer for each payment?
Yes.
What's the total amount of the payments that were paid from the trust account?
$105,000.
Let's display Peoples 44 in evidence. Do you have that on your screen?
Yes, sir.
Do you recognize that document?
Yes, sir.
What is this document?
It is a detailed general ledger report from MDS.
Does that show payments from the DJT entity?
Yes.
And where do you see that?
In the upper left-hand corner, a company named DJT.
So is this the same kind of a report that we just looked at? This is for a company named DJT, and the last one was for a company named DJT Rev.
That's correct.
Does it show payments to Michael Cohen from a company named DJT in response to the approved invoices we just discussed for the months from April to December of 2017?
Yeah.
And what account code were they coded to?
Legal expense 51505.
Does this record the description of a retainer for each payment?
Yes.
What's the total of the payments that were paid from the company named DJT?
This is $315,000.
Thank you. We can take that down. Mr. McConney, are you familiar with a tax form called a 1099?
Yes.
What's a 1099?
There are various types of 1099-S. You get 1099-S from banks for savings account for interest. You get them from brokerage accounts for dividends. Non-employees get a 1099 miscellaneous. There are a number of 1099-S that can be issued for various reasons.
Did part of your responsibilities as controller of the Trump Organization include overseeing the preparation of 1099-S?
Yes.
How are 1099-S generated?
If the checks were issued from MDS, there is a program in MDS that would literally issue 1099 forms or print the 1099 form, and we can just make them out and send them to the company.
What did the Trump Organization do with the 1099-S after preparing them?
We filed them away in our tax file or files.
Did you send them to anybody else?
We sent one copy to the individual or the entity that the 1099 was for, and a copy to the Internal Revenue Service.
Can we display People's 93 just for the court, the witness, and counsel? Mr. McConney, do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
It is a 1099 for 2017, 1099 miscellaneous for 2017.
Directing your attention to the box at the top left, who is the payer?
Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust.
Is this an example of a 1099 that you just described preparing?
Yes.
I offer People's 93 in evidence.
No objection.
Exhibit 93 is accepted into evidence.
Mr. McConney, please take a look at People's 93. And again, let's highlight the payer's name. And please tell the jury who is the payer.
The payer, Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust.
And address your attention to the box holding recipient's name. Who is the recipient?
Michael D. Cohen, Esquire.
And to the right of that box, in box 7, what is that box labeled?
Non-employee compensation.
What's the amount?
$105,000.
What do you understand that $105,000 to reflect?
Those were payments made to Michael Cohen during calendar year 2017.
And were those payments made to Mr. Cohen during calendar year 2017 from the trust?
These were from the trust, yes.
Let's turn to the second page. Does this show a second form 1099 Missy?
Yes.
And what is the year?
2017.
Who is the payer for this 1099?
Donald J. Trump.
Who is the recipient?
Michael D. Cohen, Esquire.
And take a look at box number 7. Let us know again what box number 7 reports.
Non-employee compensation.
What's the amount recorded in box 7?
$315,000.
What do you understand that $315,000 to reflect?
Those were payments made out of the DJT account to Michael Cohen for calendar year 2017.
And what's the total amount reflected in the two 1099-S?
$420,000.
So are these the 1099-S that the Trump Organization issued to Mr. Cohen to reflect the $420,000 payments that Mr. Cohen received in 2017?
Yes.
And you testified earlier that these 1099-S go both to the payer and to the Federal Internal Revenue Service?
Recipient and the Internal Revenue Service.
Thank you. You can take that exhibit down. Mr. McConney, are you familiar with a federal agency called the Office of Government Ethics?
Yes, I am.
Is that agency sometimes referred to as OGE?
Yes.
Did your responsibilities when you worked at the Trump Organization include helping to prepare an annual financial disclosure report for Mr. Trump to be submitted to the Office of Government Ethics?
Yeah.
Did you have a name for that annual financial disclosure report?
We used to call it by the form number. It was 278E as in Edward.
Can you describe what the form 278E is?
It is a filing. It's what's called a conflict of interest form that the government requires certain individuals to file annually. Semi-annually. I am not too sure of other reports, but the president had to file this form annually.
Did he file it both when he was a candidate for presidency and as president?
We filed reports from when he declared his candidacy in 2015 until when he left office in 2017. He is a candidate now. I am not there, so I don't know if he filed anything.
During your time at the Trump Organization, did you work on the Form 278E before Mr. Trump became president?
Yes.
What kinds of financial interests are required to be disclosed on the Office of Government Ethics Form 278E?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
You mentioned, Mr. McConney, that the 278B is a conflicts disclosure form?
Conflicts of interest, yes.
What kinds of information are collected and reported on that form?
There is a schedule that lists all the entities you belong to, your position in those entities, I believe the date you acquire that position or interest in the company, the date you disposed of it. Listing of your assets, the value of the assets, location of the assets, the income for that assets. I think there were retirement funds, retirement payments, your spouse's assets, your stock holdings, bond holdings, bank accounts, liabilities. I think gifts, I think that's most of the major, if not all of them.
What was your role in preparing the report when you worked at the Trump Organization?
The first time I was involved with something, we went through the whole document from A to Z. Since it took so long, at one point we were up at 4 o'clock in the morning just filing the document. That may be normal for you, but not normal for my life. So we kind of split it up. So I took care of a few pieces of the form and someone else took care of the rest of the form.
Which aspects of the form did you take care of later in the process?
I took care of Mrs. Trump's assets, stock holdings, stock transactions, bank accounts, brokerage accounts, liabilities. I think that's it.
Did you help prepare Mr. Trump and then President Trump's submission to the Office of Government Ethics? For each year, Mr. Trump was a candidate or a federal official while you still worked there?
Yes, I filed it through or helped file it through January of 2017.
Please display for the witness, the court, and parties the documents marked for identification as People's 81. And Mr. McConney, please let me know when you have that on your screen.
It's here.
Do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
This is a 278B.
Is this the first page of that document?
Yes, it is.
So is this a copy of the annual financial disclosure report of the kind you helped prepare?
Yes.
Is this the signed, a certified annual report for year 2017?
Yes.
Did you help prepare this document?
Yes.
Did you have an opportunity to review each page of People's 81 before testifying?
Yes.
Is this an exact copy of the signed and certified annual report for President Trump for the year 2017?
I believe so, yes.
I offer People's 81 into evidence.
Objection.
Please approach.
Discussion is held at sidebar on the record.
Thank you, Judge. My first objection to this exhibit is based on the presidential media argument we made. This is a document that President Trump signed in 2018 as President of the United States. And so we believe it is an official act that should not come into evidence at the trial.
Okay.
So for the same reasons I believe we briefed and argued previously, there is no evidentiary inadmissibility doctrine for official acts. And in any event, the regulations require the filing of the OGE Form 278 for presidential candidates, candidates for federal office and federal officials, for reasons including for the purpose of ensuring compliance with the federal conflict of interest law. It is not a document entitled to any evidentiary exclusion at all.
I agree.
The second objection is that there are parts of this disclosure form that appear to be based on business records that the witness is familiar with. There are other factual assertions in here that I don't know he laid a foundation for, including factual foundations or governmental official offices adopting the form on the first page. I don't think that can come in as a business record. I don't think, as proffered right now as a business record, it can come in.
We are admitting this to show, or offering this into evidence to show, that this is a signed and certified statement by the defendant. One page, page 45 of that document, includes a footnote describing his liabilities and acknowledging that in 2016, Mr. Cohen incurred expenses on his behalf, and the defendant repaid those expenses in 2017. That is an admission.
Okay, I will let it in.
Thank you.
Discussion at sidebar concluded, and the following occurred in open court.
Overruled. The document is accepted into evidence.
Please publish People's 81. MX McConney, please tell the jury what this document is.
This is the President's annual filing of the non-disclosure form or conflict of interest form, which I believe is for probably the first 20 days of 2017.
Mr. McConney, let me direct your attention to the top of the first page, to the boxes in the top left corner. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
Can you read out loud the report type?
Report type is annual.
And can you read out loud both the year indicator and the year?
The year is, it says, year annual report only 2017.
Do you understand this to be an annual report as opposed to a new entry report?
Yes.
Let's take a look at the middle of the first page. And can you blow up that date, please? What's the date that this was signed and certified?
May 15th, 2018.
So I think you said a minute ago that this was a report related to the first 20 days of 2017. Having looked at the report type, year, and date, do you have a different understanding?
I was going by the upper left-hand corner, which was the date. I misread it. Yes, the years, I misinterpreted the years.
Well, do you understand this to be the annual report for 2017, which was signed and certified and submitted in 2018?
Yes.
Thank you. Do you recognize the signature on that first signature line?
Yes.
Whose signature is it?
That's President Trump's signature.
How do you recognize that signature?
I have seen it many times.
And tell us again what the date is on this document.
May 15th, 2018.
Please take a look at the language just above the signature. Do you see a line that reads, Filer's Certification?
Yes.
Please read that line out loud.
I certify that the statements I have made in this report are true, complete, and correct to the best of my knowledge.
And that's Mr. Trump's signature in the certification box below that filing certification line.
Yes.
Let me direct your attention to the 45th page of this document. At the top of the page, can you read what section of the submission we are in?
Part 8, liabilities.
And can you now let me direct your attention to the language at the very bottom of that page, the language in small type. If we can zoom in, make that as large as we can, and highlight there. Mr. McConney, can you read what that line says?
Sure, in the interest of transparency, while not required to be disclosed as reportable liabilities on Part 8, in 2016, expenses were incurred by one of Donald J. Trump's attorneys, Michael Cohen. Mr. Cohen sought reimbursement of those expenses, and Mr. Trump fully reimbursed Mr. Cohen in 2017. The category of value would be $100,000 to $250,000, and the interest rate would be 0.
Let me ask you a question about the category of value. In your work on the financial disclosure report, this 278E form, do you have an understanding of how liabilities are required to be disclosed?
Yes.
What is that understanding?
They are reported within a range of a certain point and anything within that range.
Okay, so a filer is not required to report a specific dollar amount, but instead is required to disclose the dollar value range of a given liability. Is that right?
Well, the range that dollar amount would fall into.
Tell us again what the category of value is for the line you described.
$100,000 to $250,000.
Earlier today, you testified about your discussions with Alan Weisselberg about money that was owed to Michael Cohen, right?
Yes.
And you testified that the two payments owed were $130,000 for the wire to Keith Davidson and $50,000 for Redfinch Tech Services?
That's correct.
And that adds up to $180,000, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Is that consistent with the disclosure on the certified government ethics form of an obligation to Michael Cohen in the range of $100,001 to $250,000 for expenses incurred in 2016?
It was a long question. Can you just repeat it again? I remember pieces of it.
Sorry. Let me back up a few seconds. You testified about discussions with Alan Weisselberg in January of 2017?
Yes.
About money that was owed to Michael Cohen?
Yes.
And the two amounts that were owed were $130,000 to Keith Davidson and $50,000 to Redfinch?
Yes.
And what does those total up to?
$180,000.
Is it consistent to the disclosure of a liability in the range of a $100,000 to $250,000?
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
Your witness, you may inquire.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. McConney.
Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
I am well. My name is Emil Bove, and I represent President Trump. We haven't met before, right?
No, sir.
And you just testified about a series of payments that were made to Michael Cohen in 2017, right?
Yes, sir.
And in that time frame, 2017, Michael Cohen was a lawyer, right?
Okay.
Right?
Sure, yes.
And payments to lawyers by the Trump Organization are legal expenses, right?
Yes, sir.
And you booked those payments on the general ledger as legal expenses, correct?
Yes.
And during your 30-something plus years at the Trump Organization, you sort of rarely had conversations with President Trump, right?
Very few.
And during the instances when you did speak to him, you didn't talk about accounting software, did you?
No.
You never gave him a tour of the MD system, right?
No.
And you have no reason to believe, do you, that President Trump understood the details of MDS?
Objection.
Overruled. You can answer that.
I'm sorry. Can you ask that again?
You didn't have any reason to believe that President Trump understood the details of MDS?
Correct.
And you did not talk to President Trump about the events that you just described in response to Mr. Colangelo's questions, did you?
I did not.
You did not talk to him about those events in 2016, correct?
I did not.
You did not talk to him about those events in 2017?
I did not.
And you did not talk to him about those events in 2018 either?
I did not.
Not ever, right?
No.
President Trump did not ask you to do any of the things that you just described in response to Mr. Colangelo's questions, correct?
He did not.
And as far as you know, President Trump did not ask anyone to do those things, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
I am just asking about your knowledge.
Okay, so can you ask it again?
Can't ask it again. Sorry, I just want to focus, though. My question's, too, about what you knew.
Okay.
In none of the conversations that you had with Mr. Weisselberg, did he suggest that President Trump had told him to do these things?
Alan never told me that.
And you testified about some emails that you have exchanged with Michael Cohen, right?
Yes.
And it seems like the bulk of those were in 2017, correct?
Yes.
You did not actually talk to Mr. Michael Cohen about any of these issues, did you?
Objection.
Overruled.
No. Talk to Michael. No.
You did not speak to him about these issues, correct?
Correct.
Not in 2017?
Correct.
Not ever?
Correct.
Now, Cohen worked at the Trump Organization for a long time, right?
Yeah.
About a decade?
Give or take. I don't know exactly how long he was there.
That's a rough ballpark.
Yes.
And your interactions with him were sporadic?
Minimal.
And then he left the Trump Organization in January of 2017, right?
Yes.
And at that point, he started to work as the personal attorney to President Trump, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Outside of the Trump Organization, right?
Correct.
Mr. Bernick, if you can please publish Government's Exhibit 37A in evidence. Thank you. This is one of the emails that Mr. Colangelo asked you about, right?
Yes.
This is an email that you sent to Deborah Tarasoff in February of 2017, right?
Yes.
Mr. Bernick, if we can please take a look at page 3 of the exhibit. This is an email thread that contains messages from Michael Cohen, correct?
Yes.
And in the year 2017?
Yes.
February of that year?
February 14, yes.
And let's take a look at page 5 of the exhibit. If you can zoom in on the signature blocks. This is the signature block that Cohen was using in 2017, right?
Yes.
Personal attorney to President Donald J. Trump, right?
Yes.
It doesn't say fixer, does it?
No.
And he is not using a Trump org email, correct?
If that bottom line is his email, it probably should be. Based on the signature block, yes, he did not.
It is a Gmail account, right?
Yes, sir.
And these signature blocks are consistent with your understanding of what Mr. Cohen was doing at that time in 2017, right?
Yes.
Which is that Mr. Cohen was acting as President Trump's personal attorney, correct?
Yes.
So by early 2017, for accounting purposes, Mr. Cohen was akin to a vendor to President Trump?
Yes.
Mr. Bernick, can we take a look at Government Exhibit 37C, please? And if you can bring up page 3. Can you see that okay?
Yes, sir.
This is one of the invoices that you testified about, right?
Yes, sir.
And if you take a look at the header, it says Michael D. Cohen and Associates PC, right?
Yes.
That acronym PC stands for Professional Corporation, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you don't know one way or the other whether Michael Cohen actually set up a professional corporation, do you?
No idea.
But you know that by this time period in 2017, he was purporting to have done so, right?
Yes.
And in that way, representing that he had an outside firm, correct?
You mean he was outside the Trump Organization?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
And you don't know one way or the other from your advantage point whether Mr. Cohen did legal work for President Trump in 2017, do you?
I do not know.
You don't know if he did legal work for President Trump in connection with Summer Zervos?
Who?
Summer Zervos?
No idea.
And you don't know whether Mr. Cohen did legal work in 2017 for members of President Trump's family, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
Mr. Bernick, can you publish Government's Exhibit 37K? And if we can zoom in on the 9:31 a.m. email. So this is an email it's an email thread that you testified about earlier. This message is from Michael Cohen to Alan Weisselberg. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
And do you see where it says, please call me to discuss the last open foundation matter?
Yes, sir.
And so does this suggest to you that in 2017 there was an open matter that Michael Cohen was handling?
Yes.
We can take that down. Thank you. Now, I think you said before that January 2017 was a period of flux and chaos at the Trump Organization?
That's putting it mildly.
And that's because President Trump had become president of the United States, right?
Yes, sir.
And the way of doing business at the company had to change, right?
Drastically.
Change drastically from what had gone on for decades, correct?
Yes, sir.
And there was a period where things were in flux because you were trying to figure out how to do that, right?
Yes, sir.
For the first time in decades, President Trump's main office was in Washington, D.C., hundreds of miles away, right?
Yes, sir.
So he was not in New York as much as he had been previously to sign personal checks?
I don't remember seeing him in New York at all.
During the time he was president?
Right, correct.
And he was the only signatory on his personal checking account, right?
That's correct.
Now, another change that happened around this time frame, late 2016, early 2017, is that President Trump's assets were moved into the trust, correct?
Yes.
That trust was accompanied by a set of detailed conflict of interest procedures, right?
No idea. I never saw the trust document, the actual trust documents. All I have seen was the chart, the structure chart, and there was the entity listing behind it and one paragraph inside the trust.
But you understood that the purpose of the trust was to eliminate potential conflicts of interest as President Trump ran the country, correct?
Objection.
Overruled, if you know.
I have no idea.
Do you recall that Sherry Dillon helped to develop the trust?
Yes, sir.
And Ms. Dillon is outside counsel from a law firm, right?
Yes.
This trust structure was disclosed to the public in January of 2017?
I have no idea. I don't know that.
I would like to show the witness, the court, and the parties, if I could, Defense Exhibit H10. I want you, if you can take a look at that and let me know if it refreshes your recollection about public disclosure relating to the trust structure.
Objection, Your Honor. May we approach?
Sure.
Discussion is held at sidebar on the record.
Thank you, Your Honor. First of all, to the extent this is intended to refresh his recollection, he didn't say, no foundation has been laid. He didn't say that he might know and needs to be refreshed. He said he had no idea. Second, the attempt to offer this document, for this document to be offered as testimony or argument from counsel on cross or cross-examination, on anything other than refreshing his recollection, this appears to be an exhibit, or an attempt to admit an exhibit that the court already excluded for failure to disclose after months of requesting exhibits.
If we can have the answer read back. I thought he did.
Can you read it back?
I would like to show the witness, the court, and the parties, if I could, Defense Exhibit H10. I want you, if you can take a look at that and let me know if it refreshes your recollection about public disclosure relating to the trust structure.
I have no idea.
So I think when he says, I can ask, is it possible that something would refresh your recollection? I think that the answer is open enough to allow him to take a look at the document to see if it refreshes his recollection.
Sustained.
Discussion at sidebar concluded, and the following occurred in open court.
Sustained.
I think you testified on direct that there were 2 trustees to the trust,
Yes, sir.
and those trustees were one of President Trump's son and Alan Weisselberg, right?
Yes.
It was basically the trustee's responsibility to manage the trust, right?
Yes, sir.
And it was your understanding that the trust did not file some tax returns, right?
That's correct.
This was not an entity in that sense, right?
Correct.
And I think you said there are over 500 entities that were rolled up into this trust.
Before I left, there were over 500 entities, to my knowledge.
And either directly or indirectly, the trust owns all of them, correct?
Yes.
And that was true in 2017, right?
Yes.
And among those entities, there were thousands of employees, correct?
Yes.
The entities owned properties all over the world, correct?
Yes.
There were hotels with tens of thousands of guests, right?
Yes.
Members at golf courses in the thousands, right?
Yes.
Those facilities hosted weddings and other events.
Yes.
Because they were spread out all over the world, they involved settings with all different types of cultures, right?
Yes.
President Trump had all different types of partners all world, correct?
Yes.
And as a result of that diversity, there was very real commercial risks to adverse publicity, correct?
I am not a marketing person. It's hard for me to answer that question.
But you understood that the organization was paying marketing people, right?
Yes.
And that if there was news that was negative about President Trump or the organization, it was bad for business, correct?
Objection.
Overruled. You can answer.
Yes, sir.
And each one of these entities, to the extent they had a bank account, had a general ledger. Is that correct?
Yes.
And there was a separate general ledger relating to President Trump's individual account, correct?
Personal bank accounts, yes.
That was in 2017, right?
From the day it started.
And the general ledger relating to President Trump was to cover his personal expenses, correct?
It was like his personal checkbook.
So that could include housing costs, right?
Housing costs, other personal real estate taxes.
Utility bills,
Yes.
educational expenses for his children.
Yes.
And these were all kept as part of a separate general ledger, right?
Yeah.
And you testified a little bit about keeping track of President Trump's cash position.
Yes, early on.
And whether you were doing that directly or responsible for people who were doing it, that continued throughout your time in the Trump organization?
I received weekly reports and took a look at it.
And there were times during the course of your employment where President Trump's cash position was in the hundreds of millions of dollars, right?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall that in 2017, there were times when that position was at least $60 million in unrestricted cash?
Well, at least.
And those reports that you were looking at, you understood them to be accurate, right?
Yes.
These things are true.
Yes, sir.
You were asked a lot of questions about the MDS system and legal expenses, right?
Yes.
And we talked a lot about the legal expenses account, which is number 51505, if I have that right.
That's correct.
I only have it right because I can read it. The legal expenses account was a specific item in the Charter of Accounts.
Yes.
It was basically part of a drop-down menu.
Yes.
In 2017, it sounds like the MDS system was a bit antiquated, was it not?
Yes.
I think you said you actually helped design it. That was in 1991?
1991.
And so these categories, there was a level of rigidity to them, right?
Yes.
If you were talking about payments to an attorney, legal expenses, that was the account that was used, right?
Yes, sir.
As this legal expenses account was used in 2017, the purpose was basically to make payments to attorneys so they could be reviewed at the end of the year, right?
Correct. Most legal expenses, most personal legal expenses are not deductible for tax purposes.
You wanted to have one place where you knew you could find a way to discuss them with Mazars, the outside accountant?
Yes.
So Mazars could make decisions about deductions, correct?
That's correct.
You testified on direct examination about 2 conversations that you had with Alan Weisselberg in 2017, right?
Relating to this subject, yes.
Early 2017?
Early 2017, yes.
And during one of the conversations, you took some notes, if I understand it right?
Yes.
At another point, Weisselberg handed you a document, right?
Yes.
I think you said on direct that each of those interactions was short?
Very short.
Under 5 minutes?
Probably, yes.
Even less, maybe?
It could have been. It was a few years ago. I don't really remember.
During one of those conversations, Mr. Weisselberg conferred to you that Cohen was coming off the payroll of the Trump Corporation, correct?
That's correct.
And that is consistent with the email signature block that we looked at a minute ago?
Yes, when he became personal attorney for the president, yes.
And you said that Mr. Weisselberg mentioned that Cohen was seeking some kind of reimbursement, right?
Yes.
He, Weisselberg, did not say anything to you about what Cohen was seeking reimbursement for when you had these conversations in January of 2017, correct?
Correct.
And I would like to talk a little bit about your notes document, which is Government Exhibit 36. If we can bring that up, please. If we can zoom in a bit. Thank you. Now, I would like to direct your attention to the line that says X2 for taxes. Do you see that?
Yes.
I think you testified previously that you don't have a specific recollection of what Weisselberg told you that meant, right?
Right. He was just rattling off information I had to write down.
You were taking notes and just writing down what he said?
Yes.
And this was his idea, right?
Yes.
And you don't know where the idea came from, correct?
No, I don't.
Mr. Weisselberg had a lot of different experiences, but he was not a tax accountant, correct?
He was not a tax accountant.
Now, let's take a look at the document that Mr. Weisselberg handed you. Government Exhibit 35, please. Zoom in on the bottom, please. Now, I think you said you don't have a specific recollection of when Mr. Weisselberg handed you this document.
Correct.
You don't have a specific recollection of the conversation around the document, right?
Correct.
And it sounds like basically your present memory is that you understood you were supposed to keep track of this piece of paper that he handed you, right?
Yes.
Now, on direct, you sort of offered an interpretation of the words gross up. Do you remember that?
I don't remember the exact wording, but it sounds right.
I am referring to the entry on the page. I think you said it reads gross up to.
Yes.
But you don't know exactly what Weisselberg meant by that, do you?
No, nobody would know.
The idea to double the payment to make sure that Cohen got $180,000 after taxes, that doesn't make a lot of sense, does it?
No.
And that's because the reimbursement would not have been taxable, right?
The expense reimbursement is not taxable.
And you don't know, do you, how, if at all, Mr. Cohen treated these payments on his taxes?
No idea.
And with respect to notes on the right side of the document, Red Finch, you don't know how this got there?
No, I have no idea who wrote that.
You don't know much of anything about Red Finch, do you?
No, I know very little about Red Finch.
You don't know if Cohen paid anything to Red Finch, right?
That's correct.
There's a reference on this document to a bonus, right?
Yes.
It says add additional bonus. I think you testified $60,000.
Yes.
When Cohen was an employee of the Trump Organization, the bonus would come out through the payroll, right?
Correct.
And in this flux period, that was a lot more complicated once he left the Trump Organization, correct?
What was more complicated?
How to pay the bonus. It wasn't as simple as just routing through payroll anymore. He didn't work there anymore.
Right.
We can take that down. Now, you testified on direct examination that you kept these two documents, government exhibits 35 and 36, your notes and the bank statement in the payroll book, right?
Yes.
In a cabinet in your office, right?
Locked in my office.
A cabinet that you locked, right?
Yes, sir.
And the reason that that cabinet was locked was because the payroll book contained a lot of sensitive information, right?
It was a drawer with other payroll information, not just that book.
It's not that these notes were particularly sensitive. It's that the payroll book contained personal identifying information relating to the thousands of employees, right?
Well, technically just employees that I was paying through Trump Payroll Corp. It was weekly reports, terminations, a lot of employee payroll information.
You locked the drawer to try to keep that sensitive information secure, right?
Yes.
We're talking about Social Security numbers, right?
Social Security numbers, dates of birth, salaries, bonuses.
And one of the reasons to try and keep salaries and bonuses secure is that you don't want rumors to get around about who is making what, right?
Yes.
Isn't a fact that most of the drawers in your office were locked?
Yes.
For the same reason, right?
That a lot of sensitive information.
So you kept it locked to keep it secure, right?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Bernick, can we take a look at Government Exhibit 37A, please? And if we can go to page 2 and zoom in on the email. This is one of the messages that Michael Cohen sent to you in response to the request for an invoice, right?
Yes, sir.
And you see it says Michael D. Cohen, ESQ at the top, right?
Yes.
That's consistent with him being an outside personal attorney to President Trump, right?
Yes.
And you see where it says pursuant to the retainer agreement?
Yes.
Retainer agreements can be verbal, correct?
To my knowledge, yes.
And this invoice doesn't say anything about the condition of the Trump Organization, does it?
The condition of the Trump Organization?
The financial condition of the Trump Organization?
No.
And this invoice from President Trump's personal attorney for personal legal expenses does not say anything about the activities of the Trump Organization, right?
No.
Now, Mr. Bernick, can we zoom in on the email at 1203 and 1202 on page 1? These are two messages also on February 14th between you and Weisselberg, right?
Yes.
And Mr. Weisselberg refers to an agreement with Don, and you see that?
Yes.
Do you understand that is a reference to two of the president's sons?
Yes.
You have no idea what that reference to an agreement meant, correct?
Correct.
All that you took from that message was that these payments had been approved, right?
Yes.
Now, if we can look at the top email, please. Thank you. So this is a message that you sent to Ms. Tarasoff?
Yes.
With a copy to Alan Weisselberg, correct?
Yes.
You asked Ms. Tarasoff to pay Mr. Cohen from the trust.
Yes.
And that turned out to be a mistake, right?
Yes.
And you learned that later?
Yes.
And part of the issue was that this was all new to the accounting department, correct?
Yes.
By this, I mean trying to figure out how to pay President Trump's personal expenses while he was in Washington, D.C., right?
Yes.
And so at the time you sent this email, it was not clear to you how you could get President Trump to sign a check, right?
Correct.
And so based on conversations with others, your understanding was that it should be paid from the trust in order to get around that practical issue, right?
Yes.
And that was all the thought that went into it, correct?
That is about it.
When somebody told you that President Trump could actually sign checks from his personal account, you fixed the procedure, right?
I was told he should be paying through his personal account.
And at that point, all the payments after that were paid out of President Trump's personal checking account, right?
For this matter, yes.
Right. In response to the emails that Michael Cohen sent?
Yes.
And you were asked some questions about 1099 forms that the Trump organization issued to Cohen, right?
Yes.
I think that is Government Exhibit 93, if we can bring that up. Can we zoom in here? So this 1099 was issued by the trust, correct, the pair?
Yes.
And it indicates that $5,000 was paid to Mr. Cohen. Do you see that on the bottom?
Yes, that was his signature, vendor abbreviation.
Vendor abbreviation relating to the personal attorney he was providing that were logged on the General Services ledger?
Objection.
Sustained.
What is a vendor abbreviation?
What happens is Multidata has various locations where it has abbreviations. We talked about DJT and DJT Revocable, the company abbreviations. For vendors, you needed a vendor abbreviation. So Michael D. Cohen, Esquire, was the name on the check. The vendor name would be M. Cohen.
So once Michael Cohen left the Trump organization and became the personal attorney to President Trump, he became a vendor for your purposes, right?
Yes.
And he had a specific vendor identity within the boxes, right?
Yes.
And this is an abbreviation that reflects that vendor identity for Michael Cohen as an outside personal attorney to President Trump, correct?
Yes.
If we can go to the second page, please. So this second 1099 reflects payments from President Trump's personal account to Michael Cohen as personal attorney, correct?
Yes.
And you see in box 7, it's listed $315,000 in payments?
Yes.
And so this is consistent with what you talked about earlier. The first $335,000 payments were paid out of the trust. That is the $105,000 on page 1 of this exhibit, right?
Yes.
And the remaining payments added up to $315,000. This is the 1099 reflecting those payments from President Trump's personal account, right?
Correct.
And you sent this form. This form was sent to Michael Cohen, right?
Yes.
And these payments were also disclosed to the IRS, right?
Yes.
Because one of the purposes of this form is to make clear to the IRS that payments have been made to a vendor, right?
Yes.
And there is no place on this form to break down payments for legal services versus expenses incurred by a lawyer during the provision of those services, right?
That's correct.
There is one figure that the Trump organization reported as being paid to Michael Cohen during the 2017, right?
That's correct.
Then it's Michael Cohen's job, is it not, to make decisions about how to account for these payments on his personal taxes, right?
Yes.
You don't know what he did with that?
That's correct.
I would like to talk a little bit about the 278E form, that government ethics form, very briefly. Can we take a look at Government Exhibit 81, and if we can zoom in on all the signatures here? And so you said that the top signature is President Trump's, right?
Yes.
And then the signature below that is actually two signature from the Office of Government Ethics, right?
I believe so, yes.
And if you see that there is sort of some fine print between the two signatures?
I'm not sure where you are looking.
Agency, ethics official.
I was looking down below.
If we can highlight that right under President Trump's signature. So that says, on the basis of information contained in this report, I conclude that the filer is in compliance with applicable laws and regulations. Do you see that?
Yes.
And the reimbursement to Michael Cohen was disclosed in this form, right?
Yes.
If we can take a look at, I think it's page 45, Bates ending 6,360. Zoom in on the very bottom. If we can zoom in on the footnotes, please. You're closer to the screen than I am. Can you read that?
Yes, sir.
This is a disclosure regarding the aspects of these payments that was already reimbursed.
The bottom two lines.
Sent to the federal government in 2018, right?
Yes.
And signed off by the Office of Government Ethics, right?
Yes.
Nothing further.
People, any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor, just a few questions. Mr. McConney, do expense reimbursements ordinarily get reported to the IRS?
No.
Can we pull up People's 35 for a minute? You were asked some questions about this document on cross-examination. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Do any of the notes on this document refer to a retainer agreement?
No, sir.
Do any of the notes on this document refer to work performed in 2017?
No, sir.
You also were asked some questions about the conversations you had with Mr. Weisselberg around the time he gave you these handwritten notes. Do you remember those questions?
Yes, sir.
Were you yourself privy to any conversations between Mr. Trump and Mr. Weisselberg about these payments?
No, sir.
How about any conversations between Mr. Trump and Mr. Cohen?
For this matter, no.
Did you participate in any conversations with the three them, Mr. Trump, Mr. Cohen, and Mr. Weisselberg about these payments?
No, sir.
Have you come to learn since leaving the Trump Organization that there were matters that Mr. Weisselberg kept you in the dark about?
Objection.
Overruled.
Hearsay.
Yes.
Your answer is yes?
Sorry, yes.
This was all happening above your head?
Yes.
You were told to do something and you did it?
Yes.
I have no further questions.
You were asked whether reimbursements are typically disclosed to the IRS just now. Do you remember that question?
Yes.
All the payments to Michael Cohen in 2017 were disclosed to the IRS on the 1099 that the government put in evidence, correct?
Yes.
Nothing further.
Anything else?
No, Your Honor.